Welcome everyone to 121 in Flux. I am Peter, and joining me for this special movie discussion is David.
Hello, I'm here because Gotham needs me.
Gotham does require a scrawny bag of vengeance. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
what I needed. Yep.
Yes, welcome. We are going to talk about The Batman, a big new release. Obviously, it's just over a week or so old now at this point, but we decided to wait so that I could talk to David about it and not just sit here on my own. So we're going to have an in-depth discussion. We'll start spoiler-free. We'll give you a warning before we go into spoilers, and we'll get into it now. Just for context, if you've just stumbled onto this video on YouTube without knowing anything about the channel or the sister channel to this, Comics in the Multiverse, big DC Comics fan, big Batman fan, do a DC Comics podcast. David is someone who actually helps out on the Comics from the Multiverse channel where that podcast gets posted. So both coming at this from a comic-heavy influence perspective.
And also do my own DC Comics podcast on said channel as well. But, you know.
Sure, yes.
Yeah, whatever.
Yes. David does a show where he tortures himself by reading the New 52.
Yeah.
So that's the thing you could check out. But this is, this is a big deal because we obviously had the Christopher Nolan films which came out between 2005 and 2012, and the fact that it's been 10 years since Dark Knight Rises is making me feel ancient, if I'm honest. But it'd been a while since we'd had a dedicated Batman film. Obviously, we had Batman v Superman, and we had Batfleck in the Justice League movie.
Yes.
Just to give you some perspective here, I think Christopher Nolan's trilogy is fantastic and is one of the main benchmarks of what all superhero or comic book movies should be aspiring to. And I think Zack Snyder's films are complete trash. So just to put that on the table up front, just in case anyone thinks where I stand on this.
I can't argue with anything you're saying, but I'm not going to allow myself be quoted as that, because I'm afraid of Zack Snyder's fanboys. So, and please don't go watch the Snyder Cut review either. That wasn't me. That was someone else.
That's right. You were on that. I
was on that.
You've talked about some Zack Snyder stuff before. That's
Yep.
right. That's right. So, not a fan of his Batman. Not necessarily because of Ben Affleck, but just because of how that Batman was written, some of his actions and attitude, straight up murdering people left and right, things like that. You know, I'm a Batman fan who cares about that. So, Matt Reeves, who directed this film,
Yes.
has directed a couple of films that are, so-so. But he did go on to direct Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes, which are two of the best modern science fiction films, and were a big reason why I was very optimistic about this going into it. It wasn't because it was still a movie with Batman slapped on the title. It was because, there's a good creator here, a good director who I actually kind of trust now to make something. And I was optimistic because of that. But I would never say I got super hyped in the way that I used to. I think the days of me getting super hyped up for a comic book movie are kind of gone. Like it's old now. I'm over it. I'm too jaded. So
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much the same on that boat. Because I pick up physical comics constantly for the past at least 2 months. DC has done nothing but back cover of all their stuff, just the Batman. And interviews with the Batman. And honestly, at a certain point, I was almost tired of it. I was like, all right, fine, we get it. You got a movie coming out. Like, I hope it's good that you're putting all this in there, but it wasn't like I was pumped to go see it. Like, I was, like, the advertising was just like, oh my God, it's coming out in March. That's so exciting. I was like, all right, well, whatever happens, happens. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have seen it as soon as I did if it wasn't for the fact of you asking for someone to help record this with. And I'm happy I did, to not bury the lead of this, but it's something that I was willing to put off until much later down the line just for the sake of having an empty theater to go see it in.
Oh, sure. I mean, for me, even, I was willing to wait a week or two at least until things were just a bit quieter. And the only reason why I ended up going on release day is because those reviews came in. Like, the Rotten Tomatoes score was sky high, and it was like, oh, this is actually as good as the name Matt Reeves would suggest it could have been. And I really want to see it now. I got really excited. But yeah, it was only that last couple of days before it came out I was excited. It was after the reviews. It was when this is actually good. Like, be excited. I was like, oh, now I'm excited because there's quality.
Once I saw the reviews come in, I was pretty hyped about it. But what really sold me was actually just like maybe 2 hours before I went to go see it. I went to my local comic shop and I talked to the guy. I was like, hey, I'm going to see Batman in a couple hours. He's like, oh, well, here's the thing. I hate Batman. I think he's overexposed like crazy. But that is possibly the second best Batman movie of all time. He put it just beneath Dark Knight. But that coming from him, from the guy who like knows his stuff, I was actually like, oh, okay, this is something.
Yeah, this could be interesting. So, yeah, just before we get into the movie itself, like, it comes back to something. I think I've comic book readers, I think at least a lot of the smarter ones for a long time have been saying, I know you obviously have preferences for certain characters and certain teams and stuff. Maybe you like Batman, maybe you like Superman, maybe you like the Flash, maybe you like Spider-Man, whatever. But ultimately, when it comes to reading comic books, you're probably better off in terms of actually finding good comics to read by following the creators rather than the characters, because it's ultimately the creators that make those stories good. So you follow a Tom Taylor to whatever character he's writing because you like his writing, and that tends to be not that the writers can't go down in quality or whatever, but that tends to be more consistent. It's more of an expectation gauge than is just the character being the character. Obviously, you hope they're going to do another good Batman run or so on, but and I think I would sort of take that from the comics and say that applies to the movies, and not just because this is a comic book movie. I think in general, follow the directors, follow the people who are making the movies, rather than just, oh, it says Ghostbusters on the on the poster, or it says whatever, it says Star Wars. Star Wars is a great example because that's been so up and down in quality because of just inconsistency and pandering to fan desires and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, but that's also, if you even look at the Star Wars things, you could have people who definitely enjoy things like J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson stuff. But, I mean, those movies didn't work strictly because of corporate meddling and whatnot.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, you can like it. It is allowing the artist, whoever is involved with it, to be themselves at the same time. There are other factors, like, yes, you might like the director, but if the studio, say, interferes and stops the director from doing what they want, then you might lead to a position where, oh, I like this director, but this ended up being a bad movie anyway. Like, that's totally possible. But best case scenario, though, the director gets to make the movie they want to make, and they're a fit for the property. And that sounds really cool, the property. I hate saying that because I want to care more than just referring to it as a property. The IP, yes. But that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping for a good creator on something good, and that leads us to the Batman, which, and a new Batman movie is an event. It's actually really funny to think that when Batman Begins came out in 2005, a movie that made me fall in love again with the character that started me reading comic books. I would not have read a single comic book if it wasn't for Batman Begins. So that movie means a lot to me. It's not even my favorite in the trilogy, but it means a lot to me because it started all that. But it's funny to think that when that came out, it only did middling, in terms of box office. It didn't make a ton of money. It took a while for them to greenlight a sequel. And I think what's so funny now is people who think, oh, Batman's everywhere, they release 100 Batman comics, they'll put Batman in every movie, is that it's actually Christopher Nolan's trilogy in a lot of ways that gave him that pedestal. That gave him that stance where he is that big of a character now, where you can't really fail. I mean, maybe you won't make as gargantuan amounts of money if it's not as good a movie, but you can't really completely fail with a Batman movie really now. No,
I can't. I genuinely could not imagine a world in which a solo Batman movie does not break some sort of record on opening weekend, regardless of how it's received. It's going to break some record somehow.
And this movie is the first movie for Warner Brothers that's had $100 million weekend in, I think it was 5 years. Admittedly, the last two don't really count for obvious reasons. But still, the fact that they after Wonder Woman and It in 2017, they had no 100 million opening weekends. And then Batman does it when we're still, like, only a couple of things have done it now. As we're sort of getting, not out of the pandemic, but we're sort of at least pretending we're out of the pandemic.
We're allowing theaters to open back up again.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, of course, Batman does that, and here we are. So it's performing very well. I think the one thing that shocked me, just before we get to the movie content itself, is I assume it's the same in the US, where the film's age rating certificate will come up before the movie starts, and our age ratings, of course, aren't PG-13 and R rating. they're the relevant ones anyway are 12, 15, and 18, and it just corresponds to the age you need to be to see it. I was shocked that this came up saying 15, because typically speaking, superhero movies aren't 15s, they are 12s.
Yeah.
Because they match PG-13. That's basically it. But this, and it was like, I knew it looked a bit darker, but this was like, oh, this actually might be quite dark, relatively speaking, because it's got a 15. And I was so pleased they didn't try and edit it down for like the various markets to get the age rating down.
Yeah, I mean, for us, at least in the theaters I go in, it doesn't actually show right before the movie. But yeah, I'm assuming this was R-rated. I just from remembering it, I have to assume
I don't think it was.
No, it was PG-13.
Yeah, PG-13.
That's incredible. That's all right. That's the MPAA deciding on some different things now.
It's just it's a time thing. Like, I swear, 20 years ago, there's no way this would have got PG-13.
Oh no, not at all. Honestly, though, I feel like wasn't it a thing of like, I think it was Temple of Doom. Was that the one, Indiana Jones? Then that like caused PG-13 to be a thing.
Yeah, because it was either a G or an R rating, and they went, we need or a PG or R rating. We need something in the middle.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost been like a horseshoe where that seemed really gruesome, and then for a while there, PG-13 was fart jokes, and now it's back to, all right, we can handle a little bit more here.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
It definitely pushes it as far as it can probably go.
Oh yeah,
I imagine, because most PG-13s, like I say, are a 12 in the UK, right? At least in recent times. If you go back to like the 90s when they were more strict in the UK, it did veer towards a 15, and our rating was almost always an 18, whereas now I'd say most PG-13s are 12s and most R ratings are 15s, and there's the rare like extreme film that's an 18, but it's it's something that is proper violent and sadistic or really sexual or something like that. But for the most part, you're looking at 15. So that was surprising. It was a shock when it came up. That was like the reason why I'm even putting it here at the start. I know people are probably like, talk about the movie already, but it was just, this was my experience of going to see it, is that I got to that and I was like, oh shit, and like all of a sudden there was this flood of, all right, okay, what you got Reeves? Give it to me.
I guess if they showed the ratings before the movies, I would actually be on the flip side of that. This movie, which has been pumped out as this sort of like actual sort of scary Batman movie, something that's actually like realistic and grim and dark, is only a PG-13. Okay. Yep.
So yeah, so like I say, we're starting spoiler free. So we'll get to general impressions. We kind of implied it a little bit, so you definitely implied it, but what's your general feelings on the Batman?
I mean, I can't fault it for pretty much anything it did. It was great the whole way through. I of course have little, small nitpicks here or there, things that got to me as a comic reader, and then things that they did specifically for me as a comic reader. But in terms of just as a movie, ignoring the comic backdrop to it at all, it was fantastically made. And I feel like the one thing that, to just tell anybody who doesn't care about anything past this point, it's a 3-hour movie. And for me personally, I could feel it was long. I didn't feel it was too long, but I felt it was long. But looking back on it at the end, I could not think of a single scene or a single segment throughout the entire movie that could be cut without ripples throughout the entire movie. Yeah. All of it was necessary the whole way through.
I can name one.
Okay.
But we'll save that for spoilers. Deep in the spoiler territory. But I can name one that I would have at least put in the mid-credits, because it felt like it should have been separate. But
okay, well, yes. Anything in the epilogue section, that could be shuffled around. But for all the plot-relevant beats.
Absolutely. I think it's so fascinating. Obviously, we're going to compare it to the Nolan films at some point. Later on, we'll do that. But it's so fascinating to have a different creative voice also make a good Batman. And it is a great Batman movie. It is great in many ways. It feels distinct from the Nolan films. It does. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap in some of its ideals, because it's still ultimately Batman. He still does not kill. He still does not use guns. You can assume that a lot of the reasons why he uses the bat symbol and the iconography are the same reasons, more or less, that they were presented in Batman Begins. You just sort of shuffle it a little bit. You kind of, you mold it to fit, but you assume it's a lot of the same things. And it treats the symbol with a lot of the same reverence, but the way it handles things, I mean, just to put it this way, like the film, not the opening scene, there's like a little teaser scene that's more to do with the villains, but the opening sequence after that point, it starts with narration. And almost every comic book you read has the main character narrating in some form or another. Batman does it a lot. And this might be the first time that a comic book movie has actually just done it, where... And it sounds like year one narration boxes, because he starts off by saying the date. He's like, October 31st. And he's like, the city's, whatever. And he starts talking, and I'm like, in the mood, the character, it felt like a genuine attempt at capturing the feel of a dark and gritty Batman comic, but a Batman comic on screen. Like, I really felt that. And I think, on the one hand, it is grounded and gritty, but on the other hand, there's some things that felt more comic booky to me than the Nolan films. It kind of depends on which stuff you're talking about. There's some stuff that, because I'm not gonna lie, I could see them throwing like a Mr. Freeze in a sequel and it not feeling out of place in this.
No, I mean, I could see a lot of villains actually coming up. There's a few that are just a bit too outlandish that I don't think would really work, but they laid, and not to spoil anything, but they laid a lot of seeds for a lot of different avenues they could take in future sequels.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, and I mean, maybe I missed something. I don't recall a Mr. Freeze.
No, it wasn't.
But no, that is, you're right. It is someone who just, based off of the world they built, it is completely possible for that to show up. And just to go off of your comparisons to the Nolan trilogy, I feel that yes, it is more grounded and real. There are some comic book moments to it, but I feel that the biggest difference between this movie and the entirety of the Nolan trilogy is that even at Nolan's darkest and grimmest moments, it still had more polish to it than this Batman's world did. This is a completely rough-edged, like, it's a city with actual people in it.
It's a steampunk more looking or feeling world, and I think one of the big improvements to compare it, because that's the thing, I think if you compare this to the Nolan films, I think they both do what they're setting out to do extremely well, and some of those things may appeal to you more depending on what type of Batman fan you are. One thing that I think would be a genuine critique of those films, and I love all three of them, would be, the city doesn't really have much character, whereas in this film, the city does feel like a character, and you get locations. I mean, I don't know what I could tell you. When they said the words Iceberg Lounge, the pop I had in my head of like just nerding out, because I was like, they're finally doing the Iceberg Lounge, because that's where Penguin like hosts his like illegal club, or well, legal on the surface but illegal shit underneath, right? Like that sort of stuff. And sure, it wasn't like on a little floating island, and didn't look like the Fortress of Solitude, but that's okay. That's okay. We can make it more grounded.
I mean, for me personally, the moment that the city came to life for me was almost practically at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah,
was that there was a fight scene to preempt it, but then there was just a scene of Bruce Wayne just driving his motorcycle through the equivalent of basically Times Square, but it all has like cobblestone. They focus that he's driving over a cobblestone road instead of actual pavement. I'm like, that's such a small little thing that could go completely unnoticed, but they focused on it and they gave more character to just this city as a whole.
Yeah, and it's a focus thing as well. It's Bruce talking about the city and describing it in this way where you could make fun of him and say he's been a bit broody and talking about the city and how he's in the shadows and all the rest of it, but it really does give it this character that I think if you compare it to the Nolan films, that's something that this has against those. Because I think, if I was to say what each one of them do on a broad stroke, I would say Nolan's films are about ideology, and they are so good. Like, I always recommend this, but I think one of the best discussions I've ever had on YouTube was me and Connor reviewing, we did all three, but we reviewed The Dark Knight, and we just had this discussion about the Batman and Joker in those movies were about battling ideologies and how it was a great epic about that, and why it's part of the reason why that film is so good is because that depth is there. Here, it's not that there's no ideology, but I would describe this as much more of a character film, because this movie is about Batman's arc. He has an arc where he learns something, and he learns something about the influence he's having on the world, about what him being Batman in this Gotham and what it's doing. There's a lesson to be learned. There's a good message from that, not just for him, but for the audience as well, about the modern world and about how we engage in celebrity, how we engage in ideas and thoughts and extremism and things like that.
Right.
So, and I think both of them are extremely good at what they're doing, which is, because I think there's a knee-jerk reaction whenever there's a new version of anything out for anyone who had a problem with the previous thing to shit on it and say, oh, we said those were shit, and then we got this great example and it proves that was shit. I think they are both exceptional at what they're setting out to do, and they sit side by side for me. As far as ranking them together and saying where do they fall with each other, is this better than 1, 2, or all three of the other? That's so hard.
I mean, like you're saying, it's they're doing different things. They're practically apples to oranges of how do you really compare. Yes, it's the same character, but it's two completely different ways of approaching it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very amateurish Batman who isn't great at everything. He does get hit. He does make mistakes. He's got things to learn. As much as it is, they say it's not an origin, and it isn't, because it doesn't over-explain how he became Batman or anything. The arc he has in this is still very much that of an origin. I'd say it's an early coming-of-age Batman story, in that he has to still learn a lot about what he's going to be as Batman in this film, even though he's already in a bat suit and he's already calling himself Batman and so on. So there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this movie is, they don't explicitly say that it is what it is, but this felt like Batman's first foray into supervillainy.
Oh, for sure.
Whereas everything up to this point has been the year one style, like mobsters and drug runners and stuff like that. Whereas this is the first time that he's going up against an actual supervillain. And that's what's really testing his mettle.
Yeah. The key things that are already set up when the movie starts is that he's been operating for 2 years. He's already formed some kind of relationship with Gordon to the point where there is a bat signal, although it's not on top of the police station. It's at like a sort of, it's like a different location. The other cops don't really feel comfortable that Gordon works with Batman. That's not something that they like about him. So that's there at play. And he's just referred to as a vigilante known as the Batman. And the movie does a great job of showing how he is sort of inspiring some fear in the criminals. Like, I mean, if nothing else, the opening 10 minutes of this movie are basically perfection as a Batman fan.
Definitely. Like I said, that one scene I was talking about with the cobblestone streets, if you watch everything up to that point, it's a perfect little Batman short film, just all on its own.
Yeah, perfect. But what's so good is that some of the stuff that's set up in that opening chunk is paid off with the final sort of parts of the arc right at the very end of the film, which is, all ties it together. It's also beautiful because of that. So much like you, I have very little to really complain about, other than one scene that I didn't like, but that's a very specific case that's separate from the rest of the film. And I will say, maybe a couple of nitpicky things. Maybe there's a couple of, because even though we're not doing the origin again, there is definitely one or two like speeches or monologues that I kind of felt like, how when Amazing Spider-Man came out and they had to redo the origin of Spider-Man and they wanted to do Uncle Ben dying again, and there's a moment in that movie where Martin Sheen has to effectively give the "with great power comes great responsibility" speech, but they're avoiding him actually saying that line because they want it to be different, but he still has to fit in the word responsibility, so he's kind of talking around it. Right? It's not as bad as that, but there is like one or two scenes in this where like Catwoman's giving a speech or Alfred's giving a speech, and it's like, I feel like you're effectively making the same point that happened in one of the other Batman movies, but you're trying really hard to not phrase it the same way. So I felt that just a smidge. I
mean, as best as I can remember, nobody ever with their dying breath said Martha. So points for that.
No, and we never saw pearls fall to the ground. No. So that's a plus. That's a plus. I mean, yes, it is. It's the question of, there have been, if you count Adam West as one, there have been like 4 or 5 good reboots of Batman since his inception, of like major cinematic releases. So if you're going based off all that, eventually at a certain point,
just because the character has to exist as the character is, you're going to be saying the exact same things over and over again.
Yeah,
And it's a question of whether or not you even bother, whether or not you even try to say that same thing again. I mean, for instance, in this movie, like you said, we don't get the actual moment itself. We don't get Crime Alley. We don't get the Wayne's dying like in front of Bruce. Same sort of thing in MCU. The last Spider-Man that popped up, they just didn't bother. They didn't bother showing the Uncle Ben scene. They just skipped by it because they figure everybody already knows that point. So it's a matter of, do you bother to try to do those moments and like the big things, or do you take the lessons learned from that moments and apply them to other things? For the Spider-Man, going back to that, all of the Uncle Ben lessons were then just pushed onto Tony Stark. 100%. But for this one, you're saying that you felt like Catwoman was saying the same lines, or that Alfred was saying the same lines. And yeah, it's entirely possible, but it's still those character moments that have to be done because that's who the character is.
Oh, for sure. I'm not even complaining per se, but I almost like feel like in some ways just say the same things again. Don't dance around it. It's okay. Like, it's still Batman, it's still Catwoman saying the same speech effectively. Thank you for that. Sorry. Like that's okay. That's totally okay. Honestly, my solution to this is simple. Not this particular problem, but just to spin this out into them not doing the origin, but they sort of accepting that a certain amount of it is a standard thing that you just always have to assume when you're seeing a Batman movie, or with Spider-Man, the Uncle Ben stuff, or so on and so on. Is some movies open up with some text, just like explaining the world. Just do that for this. Just have a bit of text, like, and not a long time so that it's like frustrating for everyone. Just something that sets the tone, where you just have a black screen, you have white text. The first sentence is, when he was a child, Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered in front of him in Crime Alley. He grew up to become the Batman, right? That's all you need to say, right? And for anyone in the audience who doesn't happen to just know that basic part of Batman, there it is. You got it in a second. It doesn't waste time. It's just there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think we're probably at the point with Superman now, of if they ever try to reboot Superman again, you could just literally do the All-Star Superman, that first page.
Sure, yeah.
Doom planets, whatever, just done. And just do it in that text box. And that, I could see that working entirely. But it does come to a line of what is the audience willing to accept in terms of, oh, well, they're just going to tell us this. What about show, don't tell, guys? Blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I think I see your point, and I think that for us personally, it would be something good. I mean, I could tell you firsthand, I brought my girlfriend along to see this, who is not into comic books at all. She knows nothing. She never saw the Nolan trilogy. She knows nothing about that. And she had no idea how Bruce Wayne's parents died. Like, she picked up what the movie said, that they did die. We have spoilery means, but she had no clue about any of, like, the Crime Alley stuff or any of that. So there is a...
Honestly, this is almost as impressive as someone not knowing who Luke Skywalker's father is. Like, honestly, it's that impressive.
This is one of those things you go through life and you're like, wait a minute, hold on. What? But no, yeah, it was... I just talked to her afterwards, and I was like, okay, so do you understand why he became Batman? It's like, yeah, I think his parents died at some point, right? I was like, yeah, okay, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's the thing. Like, I think if someone snarkily goes, "What about show don't tell?" I mean, that's a bad faith take, because this is not the plot of the movie. This is just some general background so that everyone understands. If they don't know who Batman is, this is the simple fundamentals of why he's Batman. Yeah. Just 4 or 5 sentences that just appear. Because it would feel like a big deal. You just end up with saying that's how he became the Batman, and then you just go into the movie from there. And like it would be like 30 seconds of text or whatever, and it would get it all out the way. And no one, and this is not a problem for us. We know why he's Batman. I'm saying for people like your girlfriend who would just need a little bit of context.
So, question for it then. In this movie specifically, we see that Robert Pattinson's Batman keeps a journal, keeps a diary. Like, his narration at the beginning is what he's putting in this journal. Do you think to just have a character, have Alfred or something, at some point flip back to the first page and we get literally that said out loud, do you think that would serve the same purpose?
Execution's important there, because I could see that reading as very cheesy or feeling very forced. But I could also see it working depending on how it's phrased. But I'm just thinking of a standard thing that you could put the start of this one, you could put the start of the second movie. You could put you could put the start of everyone. It could just be the my name is Hal Jordan and I'm Green Lantern of Sector 2814. You start every Green Lantern movie with that sentence.
Literally, you just want, in a comic book movie, the equivalent of a recap page.
Kind of, yeah.
On that.
But just for the origin, you don't have to necessarily go into... I mean, maybe you could, for the sequel, do a little bit of what was in the first movie, just to... Why not? You know, in this case, Batman took on the Riddler and blah, 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 blah. And just a simple one-sentence, two-sentence summary, just to set us all up. And even if you've seen the first movie, you'd be kind of like, oh, this has put me in the mood, because it's just given me a little taste of what the last movie was, and here we are.
I can see it.
I'm not a big fan of the Raimi Spider-Man films, but I did think it was quite smart how they sort of recapped the previous films and the opening titles of 2 and 3. That was a smart little idea.
Yeah, I mean, but that is also just a trend in movies. I'm pretty sure since like Nolan's stuff, where just opening credits aren't really a thing.
Yeah, that's not a thing. He's never... I think he had maybe them on Memento. I think he had them in Insomnia, but I think ever since Batman Begins, he's just never done that. They're always at the end now, the opening titles.
But I feel like that's a lot of movies have inherited that ever since then, of just like, let's get the production logos and then move on.
They just want to get started. They want people to just be into the movie immediately to sort of capture people's attention. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, to just talk about more stuff in the movie then, the broad stuff here.
Bring it.
Let's start with Batman. Let's start with the costume, the car, like all that stuff, the performance, those general ideas. It's funny, if you told me 10 years ago that this Twilight kid's going to be Batman, my reaction, I would have probably been embarrassing, my reaction to that, if you said that to me 10 years ago.
I mean, I'm right there with you, just in terms of I know that Robert Pattinson has hit up the, not particularly indie scene, but the more artsy films since Twilight. He's been more picking and choosing of which stuff he wants to do. The last thing that I saw him in was Tenet, which I thought he was great in, but because it was Nolan just rewriting how time works, it was just a whole bunch of throwing out concepts more so than acting. So it was hard to tell who he was really in it.
Did you see The Lighthouse, though?
I did not. I did not manage to catch The Lighthouse. And that's one of those artsy films that I know he was fantastic in.
There's definitely acting in that film.
But yeah, when I saw this announcement come up, I'm like, all right, I know he has the chops just from what I've heard. I know that he's been in all these other films and he has these abilities to do so. But I still hadn't seen him do anything that seemed like Batman to me. So when he showed up and he started doing his thing and he started beating up criminals and whatnot, I won't say that it came immediately. I don't think that it was an initial thing of, okay, I see him beating up the criminals, therefore he's immediately Batman. But I think it was somewhere around after the first victim of the Riddler that when he spent some time as Bruce Wayne as well, I really did pick up on, okay, no, he is managing to pull this off. He is able to get both sides of the character down. And even when he's Bruce, I could still feel that like inner rage turmoil sort of thing that a lot of times people just don't continue. Like a lot of, I don't want to downsize any particular actor, but I do feel like that, especially for the 80s to 90s Batman movies, they had such a line between Bruce and Batman where it was just completely separate characters. Nolan's was a little bit closer, and I honestly, I couldn't tell you Batfleck. I guess, if you can consider what he was doing as being separate. But when it came down to this, it felt like Bruce does consider, or I guess I should say Robert, does consider the two to be separate characters in terms of it's always Batman underneath and Bruce is just the part he's playing over top of it.
Absolutely, because it goes back to Kill Bill, right? The speech in Kill Bill, where Bill gets this wrong for the record, right? But Bill famously gets this speech wrong where he talks about Superman. And he says his speech that he gives in Kill Bill, which is a fantastic film. I love Kill Bill. I love it. But
Volume 2, to be specific.
Yeah, I mean, I love the whole thing. I always think of it as one movie, to be honest. But yeah, this is in volume 2. He gives this speech about Superman where he talks about Superman's unique among superheroes because Superman's who he really is in Clark Kent's The Disguise. It's his critique in the human race. And he's completely wrong, right? Superman is way more nuanced than that. But what's interesting about that, and the reason why I'm bringing it up, is because what he actually says is much, much closer to Batman. Because Batman is Batman. Yeah, it's not the name he was given, sure, but fundamentally, the man who wants to wage war on crime and is obsessed with doing that is who he really is. And any sort of billionaire playboy that he does in public is an act, is putting on the show for the cameras.
Right, but that's the one thing for Robert Pattinson's that I will give it credit for is I don't think he ever does the playboy. Oh, I don't think at any point in this movie he actually ever bothers to play up Bruce Wayne.
Oh, no, he doesn't, because I don't think that personality exists yet. I think that's the whole point of the movie, largely, is that he's not ready to do that yet. Mm-hmm. So
he's still living 100% in Bat mode, and I think there's a line early on where it is him just trying to justify to Alfred, like, no, I don't need Bruce Wayne. I'm Batman, all the time. I would be if I could be.
And that was part of a story beat in the Nolan trilogy as well. Alfred would try to convince Bruce, you have to from a public perspective, you have to honor your family line, because Bruce didn't care about the party that he was throwing for for his parents or whatever. And so again, idea was brought up in those movies. I think in this movie it's much more realized in his performance and much more realized in kind of the overall aesthetic, because I feel like come Batman 2 or whatever it's going to be called, we're going to probably see his Bruce Wayne public persona that he's maybe going to start putting on at some point.
Yeah,
it would make a lot of sense.
I could certainly, depending on what side of story they want to go to, again, spoilers for one of the seeds they do. I won't bring it up, but just because of a certain character who may be coming back, I feel like the concept of who Bruce Wayne is definitely going to be something that could lead to a major plot point.
Yeah, and you said for you there was a moment somewhere a third into the movie or something where you said, he's nailing it, he's being Batman. There's a very specific moment fairly early on for me where I went, holy shit, that's Batman. It's a Batman that I don't feel like I've ever seen on screen before. And it was a very poignant moment for me where it just kind of hit me that they've never done that type of moment with a Batman. And it kind of, part of it comes from the fact that I feel like Pattinson in the cowl does show a lot more personality with his eyes. There's a lot more emotion coming through from him. There's definitely, you get the sadness of Batman at times from him, and it was one of those moments that kind of hit me. I'll get specific in spoilers, but really, really good stuff. And it felt unique as well because of that. I felt like this Batman movie was excelling at things that other Batman movies had yet to bother even trying, and I think that's what kind of made it feel kind of special from a comic book fan perspective, where I'm like, oh, this is nailing elements that for whatever reason no other movies tried to do up until this point, and it was hitting them, and I was like, oh, this feels great to get these in this movie. What do you think about the outfit?
It took me until the end of that first fight scene, because that was just to go off of what you were saying in terms of he was really laying into different things with Batman. Like Nolan's Batman, they spent the whole thing of him training with the League of Shadows and the whole thing of him being a ninja and using the shadows
and being quiet.
And exactly. And it allowed him to do that whole thing of building up fear from a concept of you don't know at any given point where he is. He could be across the room 1 second and on you in the next. This Batman in that first fight scene and several times throughout, because of just the weight of how heavy his costume has to be bulletproof, to have these gadgets, to do these things, as he's coming into the subway station, you hear his boots just so heavy on the ground,
it's like,
just hitting with every step. But it instills that fear in a completely different but still just as menacing way.
I mean, it still plays into that idea of you don't know where he is, because it talks about that, even the idea that he might be here. This, you might be the criminal he comes after tonight. So there's still that looking into the shadows and worrying. But yeah, this is very much a no. You're going to hear me coming, because the sound of me coming is going to scare the shit out of you.
Exactly.
That's kind of. I would say it's very RoboCop, the footsteps almost. There's this, the sound of just doom coming your way,
yeah, pretty much just heavy metal just on the pavement wherever it is. But yeah, the concept of Batman's fear here isn't so much of he could be in any shadow around you. It's a concept of he could be anywhere in Gotham at any given night. But if he happens to be around you, you know exactly where he is, and you will not be able to get away from him.
Yeah. He's the coming boogeyman that you can see coming for you. It's a very interesting, different time, and it did catch me. Like this, like, oh, they can hear him coming. I mean, I love this moment, but they can hear him coming. That's very different to what we've seen before. But it's still using fear, which is the key thing. Like he's still Batman. So no, that's really neat.
But yeah, no. When it comes down to the rest of the costume, I mean, the thing that I really can't fault anything for it is that everything on that costume feels like it has some level of purpose.
It's practical, yeah, and it doesn't feel
all practical.
There's not an infinite amount of gadgets either. There's like he's got like one grapple thing he's got in his wrist that he'll fire off. He's got one or two things on his belt. He's I think he may be one of the first Batman outside of Nightmare Batfleck, which was actually he just has a bunch of like pouches and stuff. Yeah.
Like he went full 90 because it's just like, okay, I don't have enough room to carry this particular thing. And he just has it on a thigh bag. Like it's all practical the whole way down of here's what I need to do my job. And I'm going to bring it with me in the most ergonomic way I can.
Yeah. Like his chest plate, he sort of comes off, and I thought he was going to throw it at some point because it looks like a batarang.
Same.
But he's
so close.
He uses it to cut something. I wonder if that'll be something that sort of like evolves as he sort of gets these ideas to upgrade things. And
I feel like if it's ever going to be thrown, it's going to be in an act of desperation.
Sure,
like there's something far away that he needs to like cut, and he's just going to throw it at it just to have that happen.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Or possibly maybe he'll fight a ninja at some point and get the idea for like a throwing star style bat shape.
Entirely possible. That is something in future sequels that I would love to see, of just the small but noticeable refinements to the suit.
Because right now it's very like it feels homemade right now. It feels very like
absolutely
built. I mean, impressive but built. So
I'm pretty sure it falls under spoilers, but the gadget that he pulls off when he has to jump off the roof of the GCPD.
Yeah, I'd say that's a spoiler.
Oh my god. That was I if you want to talk about a popping moment, that was the moment I'm like, this is all right. This is good.
So by and large, I like it. I mean, I still kind of wish it was a bit more of like a grain black color scheme. Like movies, for whatever reason, just like to go all black, and I guess it makes sense because it's stealth and it's more practical. But the comic book fan in me, if there's one thing Batfleck has over the other ones, is that he had some grey and black in his outfit. At least the first time. I think when they got to Justice League, it sort of became more one tone again.
I mean, I try to block that out as much as possible, but
I'll blame you.
But when again, it comes down to, yes, I would like it to be more comic looking. I would like to have it be something that I'm more familiar with, but this isn't the guy who's like Tony Stark doing a paint job on the suit before he takes it out. Like This is the guy who he found a metal plate, he sculpted it as it needed to be, and it is now his chest plate.
I mean to put it this way, like, you know, Batman in the Nolan films very much had kind of already had this like philosophy before he became the character, where he talked about, oh, you have to shake people out of apathy with dramatic examples. A symbol can be all this, and he had all these ideas of how important the symbol should be. And that's a fine way to like do it. That's a fine way to write the character, and that he has these like notions before he like does it. Whereas this is a Batman who has a lot of the fighting crime notions, and he has the anger, and he wants to do something good, and he wants to fight crime, all that stuff. But this is a Batman who is learning the power of the symbol as he goes through the career as Batman, and that's something that's developing. And I do wonder, like, you could make an argument that maybe he will pick more of a color scheme perhaps in a future movie.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, no spoilers, but just based off of the things that he learned over the course of this movie, I think that it would be necessary for him to have more, I don't want to say public appeal, but, you know, something that is able to be seen.
Yeah, it's just interesting that they have the option of doing that now. I wouldn't be disappointed if they don't. If they keep a consistent look, I think it's fine, because, you know, it's just what it is, but there's definitely avenues for that. The car as well, it's basically just a car that he's souped up with with an engine and some. He's got like a little bit of like fins at the corners at the back, but not much. It's very subtle.
But again, it goes down to the exact same thing of the suit, where he's like, I need a car that can handle a tumble and can go fast. So he picked a muscle car and he souped it out.
But not a tumbler.
Exactly. But it's nothing that's like, okay, where in the world would he have gotten that thing? It strikes you as, okay, no, I could see him, like, yes, he has to spend a huge sum of money to get the thing, but it's still commercially available. It's still a thing that he could just buy. Honestly, I know we didn't get super good looks at it over the course of this movie, but I would say that this is probably, I would say, at least top 3 of like most iconic Batmobiles for me, of just something that he's able to just, iconic's the wrong word because that implies that it's stuck in mind. I think this is one of the top 3 like most well thought out Batmobiles.
Well,
I guess I should put it.
I'll spin that. I'll spin that and say it's probably the best Batmobile sequence that's been in a Batman movie.
Oh, that's without a doubt.
Yeah,
that was fantastic. There was no riding up walls or anything like that. But who boy,
boiling acid, which is the last movie the Riddler was in. We had the boiling acid nonsense,
which it really surprises you. Like Matt Reeves was able to get in front of the WB board and be like, okay, I have this great idea for a Batman movie, and I'd like to use one of Batman's major villains that hasn't been used in a while. It's like, oh, you want to pull back Scarecrow? We haven't used him since Batman Begins. No. I want the Riddler.
To be fair, I think Riddler is one of the bigger characters, and that movie kind of hurt him for a long time, but it's been, over 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
It was time. It was time.
I mean, if Scarecrow in the comics has recently, as with Fear State, gotten this major makeover because he's been a joke for so long, I think that this movie could be the justification to give Riddler a similar makeover. I don't think he needs to look like this.
Sure.
I don't think that's the right way to go, but I do think making him an actual threat again beyond a joke was far overdue for him.
For sure. Yeah, I like Riddler in this movie. I know some people are mad that the costume isn't real close to either the jumpsuit or the green jacket and hat look of comic books. But honestly, there's moments in this where his actions and how he messes with Batman feels very Riddler, but it's also equally merged with something like a Zodiac Killer. And where it goes later in the film, where it kind of like, there's definitely a type of person in the world today that you can kind of compare him to, or type of group that he would belong to. And I think when it gets to that stuff, it's like, okay, I think as a thesis of like saying, I'm going to take this Batman villain and mix it with this real type of person, I think that's why you end up with this version of the Riddler. And I think it works in the movie, and it works for the message and the lesson that Batman both learns and what the audience kind of gets from the message as well. So,
for sure. I mean, the costume is used very heavily in the advertising, at least from what I've seen. It's just been, again, that sort of Zodiac style of like, here's this creepy guy in this creepy outfit. But in the movie, a lot of the movie is spent either very grainily looking at just his face or him completely out of costume. I don't feel like the costume is particularly that big of a thing.
Yeah, and he's off camera for like he's not there on screen
because he's leaving notes.
Yeah,
it's not him.
It's messages, it's notes, it's maybe a voice recording here or there, or like it's
right.
Yeah, so you don't actually see that much of him in costume, so it's not really that much of a big deal.
I completely agree with the getting it all linked together with actual real world things. I think that was, in terms of, you still have the character himself be identifiable as basically just, he truly believes, and he probably is, the smartest man in the room. And he is aware of that. But then it links him into this larger ideology of where those types of people tend to go to. Yeah. And it really fits for everything.
But there are still moments. There's a moment in this film where Batman is going through a building and there's green paint in the walls directing him with lots of question marks. And I'm like, if you've played those Arkham games, like you feel those moments in that scene, like you do. So yeah, there's times where it feels super Riddler.
For sure.
No, it's good stuff. So yeah, Catwoman, of course, again, very low key. It's just, it's really just a cat suit, and she has like a balaclava that's got some pointy bits that are kind of like cat ears. But they basically focus more on the idea that she has cats and kind of her attitude, rather than going all out in the the outfit is a cat outfit kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing. I think she leans more into it than any other character does, of calling her out for the cat stuff. And the most she really leans into it is just the occasional like meow, but always playfully, not a tick that she has.
Do you know what's shocking to me is that we've now had this version of Catwoman, and we've had the Nolan Catwoman, which was, and both of them are low key enough that, I mean, that one felt more like the 60s Catwoman than anything else. Right. Is that we've had two major movie Catwomans in the last 15 years now, and neither of them used the goggles look that was, you know, predominant in the comics for like 50, like for all of the 2000s. Catwoman had a look that to me was the Catwoman look, and I expected someone to use that at some point, and it's really funny to me that they've still avoided it. Like, all these directors just aren't interested in the goggles look. They want this instead.
I did have to I had to double check. Yeah, it was 18 years ago that we had Halle Berry Catwoman. So yes, you are correct. 15 years ago.
She didn't have the goggles, did she?
I thought she did. The image I just saw of her on the teaser had her. Okay, well, I guess that was a fan-made thing. Anyway, I was bringing up how that Catwoman doesn't really exist in the minds of people anymore.
Yeah, I've not seen the movie, admittedly, but for the poster, I vividly recall her not wearing...
That's fair.
She's got like a cat cowl thing on, but not the goggles.
But no, I feel as though with Batman, everyone just leans into it. They're like, okay, look, he has pointy ears on the cowl. There's nothing that we can do to get away from that, because to do anything else would just be messing with the costume too much. But Catwoman, like you said, she's been through several costume changes. She's changed a few things that pretty much anyone ever needs to do a Catwoman is a very thin latex suit and some level of something that allows a little bit of pointy ears. Yes. In this case, it's the balaclava. In Anne Hathaway's case, it was the goggles flipping up. But I feel there's a lot more wiggle room where they are just like, yeah, but like she's also just like they're more willing to make Catwoman just a burglar.
Yes.
Than they are willing to make Batman just a guy.
Well, it doesn't betray the character too much. As long as the personality is there, as long as she's still a thief of some kind, it works. Like, you don't feel like you're betraying who she is. So.
Yeah, and going into the year one influences on this, I definitely feel that they hit all the major like types of Catwoman that we've had. We've hit on streetwalker, we've hit on thief, like a major thief at that. We hit on the love interest of Batman. Like, all the things that Catwoman has been in comics and even in film have been represented in this role to some degree.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think that it's a very good representation of Catwoman on the whole. My only thing that I have against it is that her arc as a whole feels like it wraps up just a little bit too early.
That's fair. Her story's kind of done, but with a good... with the final kind of like act to the movie still to happen effectively.
Right. That's my only critique with her character, but that's not even on her character. That's just on how her story is handled. Yeah,
I even know how you change that though, because so much of how her story ends at that point leads into what the rest of the movie is. So it's hard to change that. It is very much
genuinely couldn't.
It's very much a crime epic. When I was talking to Matt a little bit about it, I spoke about how it kind of... It is long, but one of the reasons why it kind of fits and it doesn't feel like you could take anything out is because it does feel like there's a lot of segments where you could sort of break this down into 6 parts and say this is the adaptation of a 6-issue arc of a comic book, where this is the issue where Batman and Catwoman team up and do this thing, and that's like the 2nd issue of the movie. And I'm speaking around it without saying much, but it definitely felt there was segments to the story and how it plays. If I have an overall story critique, is that there is a point when it is dealing more with the Catwoman story and the crime story, where I felt the Riddler stuff disappeared for like a good while, but it's a minor thing, really. Like, ultimately, you know, T2 is one of the best movies ever made, and T2 I would complain the T1000 disappears for like 40 minutes at one point just because the story doesn't call for his appearance until much later again, and that's okay, but.
I mean, but that's the sort of thing where maybe there is some way to shuffle around the scenes and how things get revealed so that her arc can conclude a little bit later, and it doesn't feel like the Riddler stuff is gone for so long.
Yeah.
So.
I think in spoilers we can maybe get a bit more specific with that, but yeah. It's what it is. So yeah, as far as other characters go, obviously people have been talking about Colin Farrell's the Penguin.
Yes.
He is great in the movie. He's unrecognizable. Even though I know it's him, at no point in this film could I hear or see Colin Farrell.
Not at all. The only time that I was able to see through the prosthetics was in, actually, I think it's his very last scene in the movie. And that's just because for the entire rest of the movie, much like most scenes, it's very dark and grimy and in shadow. And this is one of the first scenes that just has him in daylight. And I'm like, I can see how Colin Farrell exists under that, but you still don't look like Colin Farrell.
Yeah, it's very impressive. It's very impressive what they've done there. Because they could have hired, a fat man.
Yeah.
They could have done that.
I mean, they could have hired literally any character actor, but... And also, I mean, have we really done Penguin since Danny DeVito, even?
Not in a movie, no. I mean, obviously,
No,
Oswald Cobblepot was a character on Gotham, the TV show and stuff, but
right.
I'm not counting that.
No.
Yeah.
So, no, yeah, I mean, to go from Danny DeVito to his adaptation, I don't know specifically, I'm assuming this is a year one thing, or maybe it was taken from somewhere else, but to have Penguin just be essentially the enforcer of the mob and start out that way, I could never see Danny DeVito's Penguin being that, but I can very much see Colin Farrell's Penguin being the muscle enforcer.
Yeah, I don't think that's... I don't remember it being in year one anyway, if there is any allusions to that. But it fits completely with... Because aside from the old TV show and Batman Returns, Penguin, for the longest time, what we think of Penguin is the gangster, the criminal, who runs... He's an arms dealer or some variation of thereabouts. So this feels like a very true to form version where he is kind of what we expect him to be in some fashion. Right. Again, some details are fudged compared to maybe certain things, but by and large, this is kind of what I expect from a Penguin adaptation. For sure. So,
I mean, the only thing that's really different, if you were really beholden to it, is he's not that short. Like he's
sure.
I would say pretty average height, if not even a bit taller. But
he's got a limp, and he's still got the weight, so he looks stocky as he's limping. So people nicknaming him the Penguin because of how he walks still works. It's still there. So that's really cool. You got Falcone, John Turturro plays him. He's pretty good.
I mean, again, no spoilers, but for anyone who knows Falcone in the comics or anything like that, he doesn't have a huge amount of stuff. He's not a character that's written about very frequently, but there is one particular moment in the comics, and when that moment happened, I was like, there we go. I was waiting on that. Mm-hmm. And then they finally got to it. But, I mean, yeah, he definitely plays a lot bigger of a role than I think Falcone has ever played, period, in any story relating to Bruce Wayne's history outside of maybe year one.
I mean, Falcone and Maroni. It's funny now that we've had two movie versions. Well, actually, you don't actually see Maroni in this, but he's mentioned a lot. But it is kind of funny to me that those characters that are associated with year one and the early days, Long Halloween as well, and that stuff, which kind of falls on from year one. It is funny to me that we've now had two movie universes now that have dealt with those characters. It's kind of funny that there was a time when I think no general audience would have known the names Falcone and Maroni, but now they've been used enough in Batman properties that they are kind of established.
True, but it is one of those things where, because they are just mobster gangsters, they don't have a colorful identity or anything like that.
I'm not saying that's one memorable to an audience. I'm just, it's just funny to me that people know that.
Because that's the sort of thing where I could probably show if they even did a third one, I could show every appearance of them to somebody who wasn't familiar with the comics at all, and I'd be like, all right, who were the recurring characters in those movies? And they'd say Batman, Alfred, Commissioner Gordon, and that's it. And I'd be like, what about that major mobster from the Batman? Is who?
Yeah, my point isn't so much that they're up to the level of the costumed villains. It's just funny to me that these characters, who I would have thought of as more obscure, only comic book fans will know who they are, have now had prime time in multiple movies now. Falcone's got a bigger part in this than he did in Batman Begins, but he was still a relatively big part in Batman Begins. You know, he was still a known actor playing him. It was still a notable role. And then Eric Roberts played Maroni in The Dark Knight. So yeah. I'm not dissing Eric Roberts. The man needs to work. He likes to make a lot of movies. So you got him. You got Alfred, of course.
I mean, here's the thing. The influences on this movie, as listed by the director, Matt Reeves, are Batman Ego, Long Halloween, and Year One, none of which I've read. I'm aware of them. I know the basics, but I've never actually sat down and read them. But I did sit down and read Volume 1 of Jeff Johns' Batman Earth 1. And this feels like the Alfred was pulled straight out of there. Where it's just this more gruff, more tougher, like someone who, yes, he was the caregiver for Bruce Wayne, but he never did feel like the butler, really. He felt more just like the guardian of Bruce as he was growing up. Like someone who was put in that position.
Yeah, I liked him in the movie. I think he feels less traditional Alfred. I can see what you're saying by saying he's closer to the Earth one, although I still don't think he's over the line, because there's like a sort of line where the Alfred in the Earth one is like this really military focused guy who's like really tough and training Bruce and stuff like that. Whereas here, Alfred, he's still got that kind of sassy. He doesn't really approve of this Batman shit, but he's going along with it because he cares about Bruce. He still has that core characteristic.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it was a very early scene where Batman was helping with one of the Riddler's codes, where I was like, okay, he does have some level of like being able to do this stuff. He isn't there just for snappy one-liners or whatever. He does have that history, which of course, like Nolan's Alfred has as well. He had a military background, but it just struck me as this one it was the first time that Alfred actually felt gruff in any sort of way.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So,
and maybe that's like, is that Reeves' best version or preferred version of Alfred, or is it just a case of, well, they've had just pure sassy Alfred, they've had just pure polite butler Alfred, maybe we go with the gruff version of Alfred this time. But that core idea that like he does start to help like solving the riddles and stuff like that does feel very traditional comic book Alfred as well, is that he does start helping and he does get involved in the cases. And so I mean, I've got some stuff to say about Alfred and spoilers, but
for sure.
So I'm just trying to think if there's any other core characters.
Gordon's the only one I would bring up.
Gordon, yes. Jeffrey Wright. It's an interesting take, actually, I think. Gordon is an interesting one to tackle, because I feel like, for me, the Nolan trilogy that's one of the things they got perfect.
Yeah. Like that was spot on.
They got Gordon as much as I needed Gordon to be right. And I think it was interesting in this because we have this character who, he's still acting like Gordon. He feels like Gordon when he's interacting with Batman, but we don't necessarily get to see how that relationship was formed. So it is kind of working at a deficit compared to the Nolan films in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it establishes what it needs to for this particular relationship, where it is essentially Gordon is 100% in Batman's corner right now. Like, he has no reason to doubt that he is all in on the Bat. And it's interesting because I feel like throughout all the movies of the Nolan trilogy, Gordon was always still willing to like talk down to Batman if he disagreed. He may have still ended up going along with the plan, but I think there's a point in every single movie where Gary Oldman's Gordon just said, all right, well, I appreciate the opinion, but we're doing it this way. But then Batman usually went ahead with his own plan anyway. But this movie, Gordon didn't need any sort of convincing, to the point where he was actually sticking his neck out for Batman's mistakes as well. So,
for the record, I don't have a problem with either of these versions, because Like, I think Gordon having the agency to challenge Batman if he does disagree with something, I think is important. And
Oh no,
if anything, it's something I would hope we see perhaps in future movies.
oh yeah, for sure. It's definitely two sides of a perfectly valid way to do things. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but it is interesting in how, I mean, discounting J.K. Simmons Gordon because he got all of like 10 seconds on screen.
We can't count him, yeah.
But from the, I mean, Gary Oldman's Joker was really the first Gordon. Gary Oldman's Gordon was really the first time that Gordon was given a real character. None of the 80s movies really did that. So it was interesting to see how they developed him into something. And I feel like they pretty much took it out of the comics, because the comics have been developing him since like year one.
Yeah, he's been which is why it's so disappointing watching those older movies. Is he's nothing. He's just
right.
He may as well be a cardboard cutout, to be honest. That's how little his character is. Here you have this interesting thing where, because those last movies focus so much on the Gordon relationship, they obviously didn't necessarily spend as much time on this. The way I would describe it is that they just kind of take it for granted that it's there, and they have this relationship. Jeffrey Wright is likable in the role, and they have some nice moments together, but it does not have the development given to it that you got to see throughout Batman Begins or through those other Batman movies. And as a result, it's missing that spark to make it feel special in the same way, but they're not doing anything wrong with what they're like with each other or how they're interacting either. He still feels important to Batman's mission. He still feels like he's necessary as an ally and all those other things. He just doesn't have the we have to learn to trust each other kind of story, really, or like the acceptance of having this vigilante be his ally in the city. It's just already there, so it's just go with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if you have a movie, a comic even, where it's Batman and Robin already pre-established, you accept the idea that, okay, there was a period where Robin was brought in and they had growing pains and they learned together, blah blah blah, and now we're at this story. You accept that that's a thing. It's not the story they're telling right now, but you accept that it happened. That's what's going on with the Gordon thing. Of you accept that there was a period where Gordon had to be brought in on Batman, and he like trusted him as a good cop, and they had like one or two things with bringing down the mobsters or whatever. And then we get to now. We're just getting the story after that implicitly implied one beforehand.
Yeah. Well, which is why I think like assessing their Gordon is kind of a weird task, because he's perfectly good, but ultimately doesn't have the story that the previous Gordon did, and because of that, inherently, like, there's less to talk about, I guess, is what I'm saying, ultimately.
He's a good character. He's critical to the story. It's not like they just put him in there so Batman could talk to somebody. Like, Gordon was actually necessary to do things. But
he's also necessary from a thematic standpoint, is you need a character who represents that side of the law, who interacts with Batman. That's important to have there. You do need that.
I mean, I would say that his two major people that he talks to are Catwoman, who is on one clear side of the law, and Gordon, who's on the opposite but equally clear side of the law, and it's him, Batman, straddling those lines between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point, actually. So yeah, I mean, as far as anything else spoiler free wise goes, before we dive into the rest of this, it's just,
what did you think? I don't know if you consider this spoiler, but considering it starts as literally the opener to the movie, what did you think of the musical choice for Ave Maria being a repeated thing?
I felt kind of like it grounded it into like a recognizable world. To me, I guess, like, it's the sort of thing where I would never have expected that in the Nolan films.
Right.
And here, I feel like because it wants to feel more on the ground, I don't know that's another way of saying grounded, but what I mean is, like, it wants you to feel like you're in the same way that you can have two types of war film. You can have a war film where you're in the room with the generals deciding where to launch things and what the strategic plans are, or you have a film where you're just a camera behind a soldier on the ground of the war, and you don't get the larger context. Yeah, you do get some larger context in this, but this more so wants you to feel like you're on the streets with Batman doing the Batman things and the detective work. And there's a lot of detective work in this versus, say, previous versions of Batman.
For sure.
And I think having like classical music, I've had this conversation before with other people about classical music in films. 2001, when I was talking to Tara about 2001, is that there's something kind of oddly timeless about using really old music, because it's really old to all of us, no matter how old we are. As classical music is old, so it doesn't date it in the same way that if you hear a 70s song and something does.
Yeah. I mean, they still did use modern songs in the soundtrack, but yeah, no, I agree. It was weird to me because when it started up, when it was literally, I think the first song you were hearing in the movie, I was like, okay, that's an interesting way to set this up, but I guess it will work for the scene that we're seeing. And then it kept coming up to the point where it was like the motif of a character, and I was like, okay. I wasn't sure how I really felt about it throughout until it got to the reveal of where the song came from in universe. And then at that point I was like, okay, I get it. I like it now. You got me.
I guess I need lead into just the score, the music, Michael Giacchino's score, which obviously, I mean, I love Zimmer and Newton's work on the Nolan trilogy. I'm not a big Danny Elfman, Tim Burton guy, but obviously people love Danny Elfman's music for that original 89 film. So I was curious what this was going to be going into. And I actually, and this has happened to me with a few Batman movies, for whatever reason, they always seem to release I mean, this probably happens with most movies, but for whatever reason, I always seem to notice this with the Batman movies, is they'll put out the soundtrack a little early. So, or at least a couple of the tracks. Because I remember listening to some of Dark Knight Rises music before I saw the movie and like imagining, oh my god, this sounds great. What's going to happen when this plays? But I listened to the track that's just called The Batman, so it's like Batman's theme. And most of the music's in that track's actually from towards the ending, to be honest, having now seen the movie. Yeah, but that's fair. I remember listening to it and going, I mean, the first question I have for you, I suppose, is how long did you have dun 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 dun. I was in my head for ages after I saw this.
Yeah. No, here's the thing. I probably would have been able to get it out of my head, like, leaving the theater. Like, I probably, because I was just so focused on, like, oh, what am I going to say for this review? What am I going to do this? But as we were leaving the theater, it was actually raining at that point. And, of course, it was, like, 11 o'clock at night. And just, like, having to walk to the car in the rain, I was like, yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
And it's very, it is very close to something in the way, the Nirvana song, which was used in the marketing and is used in the movie as well, which didn't surprise me. But again, it feels weird to say, like, I'm so used to Batman movies not having songs, like, as part of their soundtrack.
Was it Batman 89 all Prince? There was
Prince in the 89, sure. But I don't think there's much, like, even the rest of that series, Returns, Forever, and Robin. I don't think there's a lot. There was a little bit. I think there's like a Smashing Pumpkins song at one point in one of them, but it's not. It's not like a frequent thing. Certainly in Nolan's films, I never expected a Blink-182 song to just kind of kick in out of nowhere. So, and I like that Nirvana song, but I think it's interesting that the song, like the vibes of that song fit the movie, of course, which is why they used it. But even the beat of that song, the strumming pattern of the guitar, is very similar to that core dun 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 dun. Like, it's very close to that, and I think it's very memorable. It sounds good when it's used. But what surprised me, to wrap this all back round to when I said I listened to that track from the score, is that it sounded a lot more hopeful and kind of classical than I was expecting from a Batman score. That key piece of it, and it fits really well in the movie when you get there. Like that moment where that part plays, like I completely understand why it is that way. But the trailers were so broody, grimy, gritty Batman. My parents are dead. That I wasn't expecting that from the key track called The Batman. But it was nice to get it though, because it was just like, it was that moment of like, oh, there is going to be an uplifting element to this at some point. At some point in this movie, there's going to be the hopeful, the Batman has made a difference part of the music, and I like that, because as much as I do want Batman to be broody and dark and gritty a lot of the time, I do want him to feel like he's having an effect. I want to feel the heroism of it as well at some point. And having that bleed through at a key moment where it makes an impact is very effective. And I would say that it's very effective in this movie. So we'll get into that. So I think without further ado, we should probably say spoilers on the table.
Okay. Sounds good. Batman is Bruce Wayne.
An hour and 15 minutes into this review, we're gonna finally start talking about spoilers. All right. Okay. All right. So full spoilers. You've been warned for the Batman.
Yes. Let's do it.
So, yeah, I don't actually want to go through it, scene by scene necessarily.
Yeah. That seems a bit much.
But I think tackling it by plot thread, or maybe by character in some cases.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or how we should do it. It starts off with Riddler's attack. It's Riddler watching this mayor from across the street. And now it's been over a week since I've seen it, so if some of the minutiae of these details is a little iffy, forgive me, but it's hard to remember all these little details too well.
Yeah.
But the broad strokes are important here. But you get this horror sequence of this guy. He's alone, and they sort of tease, because at first I was, is this a flashback to young Bruce? Because it's this mansion, and it's it's a mother and father, and the father's hugging his little boy, and I was like, wait, is this a flashback? Is this Bruce?
I was sitting there and I was watching it. Obviously, I don't think that the narration kicked in at that point of saying what the actual day was. No,
it's after this, because it's the city, it's the nighttime, it's
right. But they did show a kid in like a ninja costume, and I was like, okay, I don't remember Bruce going out in a ninja costume, but this could very well be it, because as soon as if you have a Batman movie and then you have rich family of 3, immediately I'm assuming they're all gonna die except for the kid. It's just gonna happen that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very effective sequence. It's simple. You've seen movies like this before where it has this, not a Batman movie, but you've seen movies like this before where you've got the serial killers in the room and it's teasing them with the lights going out and I'm standing behind the guy and all the rest of it. It's very effective.
It's properly brutal too. Like, it's not a thing of like, he starts attacking the guy and then the camera just implies that he was attacked. He holds on it. We see how he's attacked and we don't stop until the duct tape comes out.
And it's a blunt object as well, and it feels like it takes a few swings and you feel the visceral nature of the hits and all that. It's very well done. And from there, so that sets your mood, and then from there you go into like Gotham Times Square, right? And even the stadium later on is Gotham Square Garden, which did give me a chuckle. Maybe that one was a little over the line. Maybe I'm cool with them having their Times Square because it makes sense. A site like this would have that, but actually, like, naming it Gotham Square Garden may just be a touch over. Touch over.
It's one of those things where they probably had it made up to look like it, and then they were like, "Oh, what should we call it?" And they're like, should we even pretend like it's not?
They should do. Do you know what they should do? They should do what the comics do. Pick a creator you want to honor and name it after them.
Yeah, that's fair.
Call it the Finger Dome or something.
Maybe any other creator besides Finger.
Okay, Kane Stadium, Kane Arena. Right. I don't know.
There you go. Perfect.
But. But there's all these shots of like people in the streets, and it's pouring a rain, and Batman's like, October 31st, the holiday, the city's full for the holiday, even the rain can't keep them away, and but it's all this moody, and it sounds like Batman. It sounds like Batman narration, and it's all these different little crimes going on, and he's talking about, I can't be everywhere at once. I have to pick my crimes. I have to pick what I target. And eventually it's this gang of thugs that are all wearing face paint. For Halloween, it's not just the gang that wears face paint, but it's all these young like thugs wearing face paint on a train. And they follow this guy who looks nervous off the train, and it's like
a gang initiate.
Yeah. And obviously there's an innocent person who's about to be up, so I'm thinking in my head, this is the one he has to intervene, because this is the one that has the victim who's going to get hurt. So this is the one that he has to show up and save. Yeah. And sure enough, we get this sequence where he walks out the darkness, and it's like impending doom for this guy. And they kind of know who Batman is, because we see people look up and see the signal and just second guess themselves. And some of them are doing bigger things than others. Some people are robbing stuff, other people are just spray painting.
There's one that's like vandalizing, I think, the first Gotham bank, and then the other one is robbing a convenience store.
But there's these moments where like Batman in narration's talking about how, but the signal lets them know that I'm out there, and they'll think, and there's moments where they'll look over into the shadows and they're like, is he here? It's making them think twice, and it's really well done. But you have this violence scene. And it's the scene in that very first trailer with the where he grabs the arm and just beats the shit out of this thug, and then says, "I'm vengeance." Right? It's that moment, and it's still really effective. I love how a lot of the fight scenes where he's taking on a group of enemies in this, it does pull back and you just get a wide shot of it happening, and it does look. It's very effective. It's probably some of the most entertaining choreography because it doesn't feel like he's obviously skilled, but it doesn't feel like he's doing really movie style martial arts. It feels really sort of like he knows how to like block and hit and stuff, but it is a bit more raw. It's a bit more visceral. And
I mean, with this movie particularly, the thing I was paying attention to was, one, were they Power Ranger style fighting where you hit a guy away and he just stays over there until nobody else is attacking, and then he runs back in again, so he's only ever fighting like one guy at a time? And two, whether or not he's actually getting hit, like whether or not he's completely just so above their level. And for both those questions, the answer is no. Like, he was getting mobbed by a bunch of people at once, and he was taking some pretty heavy blows. The difference being is that you felt him get hit, but then he just turned around and used that 100% more on the guys that were attacking him.
If he gets hit, he gets angry and hits back twice as hard.
Exactly.
Like that's kind of what it felt like. And there's the gun right at the tail end of this fight, but later on there's like fights where he's taking on a group of people who all have guns, and you see him like eat bullet shots because obviously his armor's bulletproof, right? That's just obvious. Right. And you know what? Somehow they avoided him ever needing to, like, at one point he grabs a gun and hits someone with it as a blunt object. I'm not counting that as using a gun. That's okay. No. I'm fine with that. But they never, it's really well done. There's a scene at one point where he's going through a hallway and it's complete darkness and it's lit with a gunfire. And what's funny about this scene to bring up actually is that I just did Uwe Boll's Alone in the Dark, which tried to do a sequence, a gunfight that takes place in the dark and it's lit by the gunfire, and it was the worst looking shit I have ever seen. And then I see this movie and it's like, oh, this looks cool. This actually looks like probably what Uwe had in his head that he wanted to do. But this looked really good.
Execution. It's 9/10 of it. But
so Batman takes out all these guys. But at the end of the scene, though, this civilian that was being attacked, like he's lying there cowering, and he says, "Don't hurt me." Like he thinks Batman's going to hurt him too. Yeah. And he sort of glances over at him, but this is your thesis. This is like, okay, your opening statement. This is what this movie's about: is that the civilians are scared of Batman, and the effect he's having on the world is that everyone's scared of him, and the only people who are feeling inspired by him, as we'll learn as we go, are people who are a bit more on the extreme end, that maybe you don't want to be inspiring, and that leads us into everything else, and we'll get to that. But this opening is very distinct. It sets a clear mission statement. The innocent person is just as scared, more scared even, of Batman than the criminals are. Yeah.
I mean, that's a thing that they always pendulum back and forth on the comics of whether or not the cops agree with Batman, whether or not the people are scared of Batman, whether he's a myth, whether he's real. Like, it's always a little bit nebulous depending on who the writer is. But that is something that, at least movie-wise, I don't think they've ever particularly handled outside of maybe Zack Snyder's version, but then again, they had a right to be scared of that guy.
He was branding people.
Yeah, they had every right of that. But outside of that, I don't think they ever have really handled that criminals are still people. Like, they are still just people living in the city. So to scare them is to also be scaring a very large percentage of the population. And it is, how is he okay with that? Is he fine with the fact that the people he's saving fear him just as much as the criminals do? And I like that it's battling that sort of question in it, but it's something that we have seen in the comics time and time again of, okay, is that like, how does Batman square that? I feel like that was the initial question that was made in I hate bringing it up, but the Ben Affleck Daredevil as well.
Of all things.
I know.
Yeah.
Go God.
No, it's just I think it's really powerful as an opening statement, and then it kind of goes into the movie, and we're led to the various things. We see him interact with Alfred and sort of get his ideas on things. But then, of course, the signal goes up, because actually the signal's already up, because that's the thing, is that Batman at the end of this scene, which I really loved actually, is Batman noticing the signal's out. Like, we've had this whole sequence of him narrating with all these people around the city noticing that it's up, and I get the impression as well that people maybe still do think he's a bit of a myth. Like, not everyone necessarily believes yet that he does exist, because it's not like he's been on TV. It's not like people have caught footage of him or anything like that. This is purely something that's, the press are talking about him. Perhaps when something happens, they've heard about him from the police. Obviously they're seeing this signal in the sky, but is that a real thing? Is that just like a practical joke? Does it mean anything? But he sees the signal at the end, and that's what directs him to Gordon, to the crime scene. And that's, again, that was in the first trailer. Is this, he goes into this mansion where this guy was murdered, the mayor, and he analyzes the crime scene, and the other cops are all like, in fact, one of the nice little arcs of the movie is there's this cop who calls him a freak and doesn't want to let him in. But over the course of the film, when you see him again, he does like start to like seem to respect Batman and does seem to want his opinion, or lets him investigate the crime scene. In fact, he even kind of casually gives Batman an answer later on as to what the blunt object was. I mean, all the way, it's really late in the movie, but that murder object, because I didn't know what it was. It was just it looked like a tool of some kind, but I couldn't have told you what it was. Turns out it's a carpet tucked. You tuck in the carpet at the edge of the corners of the room. And I was like, oh, okay. Actually, looks like that's what it would be used for. Now that you've told me it, I can see it.
Yeah.
And it's a clues to where something's hidden in Riddler's place, blah blah. But the moment where I was into the intro. I loved the narration. I loved the fight scene. What it set up. The moment where I was like, okay, Pattinson's Batman, is the moment where he's leaving the crime scene. He's walking through the hallway, and he sees the boy who's just lost his father. And he looks at him, and he has this look in his face that I don't think any other Batman movie has ever done for me. We get these moments in the comics from time to time where Batman encounters a child. It's usually, often it'll be like someone who's going to become a Robin, right? It'll be someone who's going to be a Robin. But where he looks across at this kid, and I'm like, this is why you don't have to do the pearls falling to the ground in the alley. All it took was Batman looking at this kid and realizing he's going to try and solve a murder that took this boy's father away from him. The fact that he sees some of himself in this kid is all you needed to get across so much of what he feels and so much of who he is.
For sure. I mean, just not to skip ahead too far, but it's revealed in a scene soon afterwards that Batman is constantly recording everything via contact lens cameras. And as he's uploading this, and Alfred is talking to him, Bruce gets distracted. He goes off to do something else. But Alfred sees that moment. He sees him looking at this kid.
I love this moment. Loved it.
You get that exact same emotional beat, but now you understand that Alfred sees that beat as well. And it's his beat of how he understands what Bruce is feeling in this moment and why he is pushing himself on this particular.
And it's right before this as well, I think, that Alfred is like chastising him for doing this, and why are you so motivated? Why are you going out here and doing this? You're becoming quite the celebrity. You're doing this and that. So that moment where he sees this is beautiful because he gets it. He looks at what was Batman's POV looking at this kid, and in an instant he in some level understands it. And what I love about it as well is that for Alfred this is a different moment, because for Alfred he recognizes this in a different way because he saw Bruce at that age react to this. He was there. He was the one taking care of Bruce after this happened, so he sees it. He sees young Bruce.
Alfred is quite literally seeing deja vu here of the exact same moment again.
And in an instant, it's like maybe he won't question why he's doing this as much because now he understands. That is just economical storytelling that hit really hard. And maybe, I don't know if it hits as hard for people who don't know anything about the characters, but certainly for me, this was all like, I was getting just moments that were working out of these.
I mean, I would say that everyone would understand how he felt, how Pattinson's Bruce Wayne felt in that moment, and therefore could elaborate some feeling of Alfred getting out of that, of just like, oh, okay, I understand why you're doing this, even if they don't get all the minutia.
Yeah. No, I think that's a wonderful thing, because I'd forgotten, honestly, because it's been a week, I'd forgotten that. I don't think I'd remembered to bring up that Alfred moment. I'm glad you did.
It's the only reason I'm here.
No, really good stuff. From here, like, there's a second murder.
Oh, and there was a card left with the first victim.
Yeah, so it's like a birthday card. Yeah,
it says "to the Batman." That's the whole reason he's like brought in here,
and
is because it's for him.
There's a clue, and then there's a second murder. It's actually the police commissioner who's next, and one of them, like, literally his finger is attached to. It's got a USB stick in it. There's a little joke moment. Riddler's got a sense of humor, as Gordon puts it, which leads to
a thumb drive.
Yeah, thumb drive. There was an informant, someone, because basically the idea that not Falcone, Maroni, the crime boss, was taken down. He was busted before the start of this movie, and there was a rat. Someone was informing the police about that, and there's some sort of conspiracy, which is what the Riddler's targeting. So everyone he's killing is in some way tied to that. So it's the corrupt mayor who's running for re-election. It's the commissioner. Later on, there'll be other cops. There'll be other district attorney, things like that. And they're all corrupt people who go to the Iceberg Lounge to party. And again, this, like, you can tie this to Batman Begins. Like, we had that place where they all go. It's where Bruce goes to see Falcone, and he's like, "Hey, look over there, there's a corrupt judge." Like, this is just that place, but for this movie. But it's a bigger part of this movie. It's a bit more focused part of this movie, and so that becomes a big, talking point for, like, investigation, and it feeds a lot into the Catwoman plot. But as far as just sticking with the Riddler solving crimes and the riddles and the murders and what it all boils down to, so a big part of this movie is that it feeds into the past of the Waynes, because eventually Riddler starts, he leaks a thing at one point, but he starts hinting that Thomas Wayne was corrupt at some way. And this question of, is Thomas Wayne, was he as good a guy as Bruce thinks he was? And it leaks that Thomas Wayne at some point maybe went to Carmine Falcone, and I say Falcone because that's how it was said, and at least one other thing, and it's like Ra's al Ghul and Ra's al Ghul. There's like two camps, and this movie does say Falcone, but in my head it's Falcone. I'm never going to let it go.
I will never call you out for it.
So it raises this question that Thomas Wayne might have either paid off or asked for a favor for Carmine Falcone, and it's at this point in the movie it's already, like, mentioned that at one point in time Falcone got shot and couldn't go to the hospital because it was all criminal stuff, so he went to the Wayne mansion and asked Thomas Wayne to patch him up, and it was kind of this awkward thing that Bruce kind of witnessed, which I think is actually from the comics. This actually kind of rang a bell for me.
It doesn't sound familiar to me.
I think at some point, I don't know what run it was, but I do think there's a story about how at one point, maybe it wasn't Falcone specifically, but that Thomas did patch up a criminal that was brought to the mansion. I feel like that was a thing at some point. But the idea that they became friends because of that in some fashion, and Thomas had this journalist who was going to leak stuff about Martha having mental health issues in the past, which again, it does sound familiar from the comics, actually. I can't name it in specific.
That is the one thing that I will bring up with another Earth One connection, is that they made the change here. Not that it's ever really been too established in the movies, but they did make the change that Martha's last name, her maiden name, was Arkham. And that did come from at least that was used in the Earth One comic as her originally being an Arkham, then I think it's a Kane is what it is.
Kane. Well, that's the thing, because they go into, like, the founding families of Gotham. They mention that in some of the backstory stuff. They mention the Arkhams and the Waynes being the two founding families. What's interesting to me is that a lot of the Scott Snyder stuff that he set up is that there was 4 founding families, and it was the Waynes, the Kanes, the Cobblepots, and it may have been the Arkhams was the 4th one. I can't remember.
Probably.
But I did sort of recognise that and go, oh, they've streamlined it into 2 as opposed to the 4. But it does feel like stuff to explore in a sequel. That because it's just
for sure.
It's put there and then like a newspaper headline or something when they're talking about it, and then it's just kind of, oh, that's a seed for later.
I mean, I don't want to skip too far to the end, but was it established by the end whether or not Arkham Asylum is a thing, or was it just Blackgate?
No, the hospital Riddler goes to is Arkham State Hospital.
It was? Okay.
Yeah, that's
I
Arkham.
couldn't remember if they said the name.
Yeah, they said it's on his shirt, I think, as well. Like, it's printed on there. Right. So what was I getting to? So basically Bruce is confronted with this idea that maybe his father wasn't a good person. And Bruce, as we see up until this point, like, he is so anti-corruption. Like, when and we'll talk about this scene separately, but when he's hearing from the iceberg lounge that there's all these like corrupt cops and like judges and stuff in there, he wants to know every single one so he can take them down. Like, he's just like learning about this now. And later on, like, when he's arguing with Gordon about something, like, he's like, no, this cop that's corrupt, like, he's corrupt, he deserves what's coming to him, we're going to take him down. And Gordon's like, no, we have to kind of like play coy about this and like sort of go for the bigger fish, whatever, or whatever the debate was. So it sets up that Batman, Bruce, is very black and white in that he sees the world a certain way, and it's in some ways it's naive, but in some ways it's kind of like commendable that he still is so dead set on this right and wrong, and he sees this as wrong. And I was sort of confronted. This is a weird thing to sort of get into, but I kind of found myself like, I don't necessarily care about relating to characters too much and things, because I can empathize with different types of people. I think that's a fundamental thing all people should be able to do anyway.
Oh yeah.
But I did find myself oddly relating to Batman in this in a weird way. And it was basically this idea that he is so like almost in a childlike way, like this war and crime that he's devoted himself to. It comes up in the comics a lot where Selina will call him out on it. Like, he's so devoted to this idea that he has that he's never going to deviate from, and that's just something that can't be broken with him. And he's so committed to not killing, to not using guns, and that thing. At some point in the movie, like, because I've never drank alcohol, and I've never done drugs, and I've never wanted to do anything like that. And at some point, like, someone has accused me of just being arrogant or being stubborn and not wanting to give into it. And there was a point in this movie where like someone was debating like letting something go with Batman, or just like be willing to not kill. It wasn't killing, but it was something like that. Be willing to cross a line, and he's like adamantly not doing it. And I think for better or worse, this like sort of childlike clinging to, I actually found myself relating to Batman, kind of like, no, I'm not crossing that line. I'm not doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to, I think that everybody, whether they're good, bad, whatever they are, I think that everybody can admire somebody, at least in media and probably real life as well, who has very strict lines that they do not cross. They have principles of their own. It's the reason why characters like I'm blanking on his name, I think it's Omar on The Wire.
Sure, yeah.
Bad guy, but he has very set principles, and that's why he is a respected character.
He's an honorable criminal, and he, like, he's very much like, if you're in the game, you're fair to like be taken out. But he's never going to go and just hunt down an innocent civilian or anything like that. Like,
exactly, and that's what I think is getting at here is, and one of the things with Batman is, yes, he has all these messed up problems of his own, and it doesn't come down it probably developed out of a childlike sort of black and white mentality of the world, but it's developed into this core principle of who he is as a person, and it's good to see someone who stands by their principles.
For sure, yeah.
Is more so of what I feel like it's coming down to. So yes, Pete, I'm very proud of you for standing by your principles.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes back to that, but I guess like the idea of it comes out of a childlike notion, just the idea that I feel like I've had this since I was young, so it just kind of, I don't know. It's whatever. Anyway, so Bruce is confronted with this idea that Thomas might not be like the noble, honorable father that he thought he was. And I actually tweeted about this. I didn't say what it was, but I tweeted about my feeling on this, because there's a moment in this film where I got very worried that Matt Reeves was about to commit a sin, a Batman sin that I wasn't going to be happy about. Is that so Bruce goes to Falcone, right, as Bruce, and it's kind of funny because he goes to the iceberg lounge as Batman early on, which even the fact that Batman goes up and knocks on the door is kind of like a new way of seeing Batman. But he goes as Bruce, and it's kind of like a comic moment because it's like the same twin bouncers that are there. I don't know if they were meant to be like a spiritual version of Tweedledee and Tweedledum or something like that.
That's what I was picking up the whole way through.
But they never said it, so if they have like actual Tweedledee and Tweedledum later, it's fine. It's okay. Yeah. But he comes in and he wants to see Falcone, and he wants to ask, is it true, did my father have you kill this journalist who was going to leak something about my mother? And Falcone, waxes lyrically. Turturro's, doing his shtick. And he kind of implies heavily that he did. Yeah, like, you know, like, your father needed me to do something. No matter how good you think someone is, they're pushed to do special things when the circumstances are right, blah, blah, blah. And basically, so what I was worried about is that they were going to not only tell me who killed the Waynes, but told me that there was a reason for them being killed. And I am firmly in the camp of either we should never know, or it's okay that if we know it's Joe Chill, but that Joe Chill is just a random thug. It's like, you know, his name's irrelevant, it's whatever, but he's just a random thug. It should be a product of randomness, and that's important to me. So I was worried for a moment. But in my head, as this was playing out, I was like, well, they've not actually outright said it, and it's just Falcone that's implying it, so there's still a lot of wiggle room here. And then he goes to speak to Alfred, who's in hospital at this point.
Because the Riddler sent a package that was meant for Bruce, because Bruce was also targeted. Yeah. For reasons.
So he goes to the hospital room, and he's already had a bit of a falling out. He's already said to Alfred at one point in the movie, at this point, that you're not my father, stop pretending to be yours. You know, something to that effect, right? Yeah. And Alfred's lying there. He survived the explosion, but he's lying there in the hospital bed. And Bruce brings this up, and he starts asking about Falcone and whatever. And then Alfred basically gives a completely opposite story. He's like, no, I don't think it's Falcone at all. I think it was Maroney for this reason. And he gives a pretty compelling reason for why Maroney would have someone would pay off. And I'm like, okay, if you're going to set up like equally valid stories that either one could have killed the Waynes, but not actually give me an answer, I can live with that. But then just the cherry on top is at the end of the scene, Alfred also says, or it could have been just a random mugger. I mean, there's no way to tell for sure. And I'm like, this was perfect. Do you know what this was, to compare it to something in the other Batman movies? This was the Joker giving the multiple origin stories and saying, you don't know which one's true or if any of them are true. Yeah. And that's the point.
I mean, I do definitely, when it was going through that, because I remember you talking before I even saw the movie about a moment that you were worried about, but I didn't look any deeper into it. And knowing that it's that now, I did have that same sort of moment where I was like, oh, okay, they're retconning the origin. And honestly, I felt like at that point, if they were ever going to do a flashback to the scene, it was going to be right then. I'm glad they showed restraint, but when they were going through it, basically it just came down to, you know, Thomas Wayne, he said take care of it as in spook the guy, not kill him. And so he still doesn't come off completely clean. He's still not, the best person. But the whole reason he was killed was because he was going to go to the police and tell them, hey, I'm involved in this. I'm an accomplice to murder.
Which is notable. So the idea is that he was tested. He did have a moment of weakness, but he didn't ask for anyone to be killed. And when he found out that he did kill the journalist, he was going to go and turn them in for it.
Yeah, exactly. Including himself. He was not abstaining himself from that. But then he said, and then the next day, your dad died. He doesn't say, because of that, your dad died. He says, and then the next day.
The timing is suspicious, and at least basically the idea here is that it's very easy to have a couple of big conspiracy stories that either one could be true, but it could also just be a random guy. It could be a random mugger in the street, and that's all it was. So I think that is super fascinating. And I love this sequence as well. I think there's not actually a lot of Alfred scenes, but I think Bruce racing home when he knows Alfred's in danger, only to find out that he's an hour late. Like the bomb arrived an hour ago, and it's already happened.
See, that's one of those few things that can only be told in a visual, like, sequential medium.
Yes.
Of you have the phone ringing, and you see Bruce trying to reach Alfred desperately, and then you see what Alfred's doing, and he's opening up this letter, and we all just know as an audience, if he picks up the phone, he will not do that, and Alfred will be safe. So it's building up this tension, but then by the time it gets to the phone finally being picked up, you found out that the scene we were looking at happened 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Like we already have the fire crew there, and he's being and it's one of those moments that it's building up the tension, but by the time that it lets the air out of the balloon, by the time it shows you that this was never actually tense to begin with, it had already shown Alfred opening up the package. So it wasn't like ruining the tension or anything like that. It built up the moment specifically for the tension to release that way.
Yeah. It's really well done. And then the hospital room scene, after all this stuff comes out. It's quite an emotional moment where Bruce holds Alfred's hand, and it feels like a genuine connection between them. And it kind of comes back down to, like, you know, him talking about how his father, like, he got himself in a rough place and he made a choice that wasn't perfect, and he had to kind of own up to that, and he was willing to do that. It comes back to something you said earlier, which is the idea that all the criminals in Gotham are still people, and some of them just dip their toes in criminals and the criminal life, and it's okay, they sort of come back from it, or they're honourable and deal with it and accept the consequences. And some go off the deep end, some are psychopaths and become Riddlers and whatever. But but the idea that in some level these are all human beings that are influenced by something and can be helped and can be rehabilitated potentially, or can, you know, it's really painting the humanity in everyone in the city in the story of Batman. And not that you're going to recuperate the Joker if the day comes where that's a thing, because he's the Joker. That's the whole point of the Joker, is that he's so far on the other end. He's the antithesis of Batman. That's the point. But the idea that his father was put in a tough position, so he had to make a rough choice, and some other people who are in tough positions and maybe have to steal to feed their families, or have to you know, steal to make ends meet. And that's like something that's brought up a lot with the Catwoman character, is when he like criticizes some of her choices as Batman, she sort of says, like, can tell you grew up with money. She doesn't know who he is, but I can tell you grew up with money because you're judging someone for this particular thing. And it's like just an interesting little point, and it's just like that idea is there. The idea that him empathizing with the people that he's either helping or even the people he's chasing, and the idea that one day they can maybe come back from whatever they are, and maybe the scare from Batman's what they need to be inspired, or so on. Like, you know.
I think it all comes, what you were saying earlier about the black and white morality. Yes, it comes from a place of him being hurt as a child and not being able to develop past that, but it also comes from a place of privilege. Of when you don't have the privilege to keep your hands clean, you don't get the ability to just see everything as black and white.
And I think that's the beauty of it, is that he has to accept the shades of grey, but on his principles, he's still black and white. Like that is still a hard line, and it should still be a hard line. But this idea that he will try and help like a troubled young criminal who, because that's the thing, at the start of the movie, like the gang, they've got like a new member who they're trying to make be the one who beat up the innocent victim, and he actually lingers when everyone else runs away at the end of the scene. He's still there for a little moment, and I almost thought he was maybe going to say something like, "Oh, I'm done with this gang shit," or I'm like, you know, he's learned a lesson here, and he doesn't say it. But I think the fact that it lingers and the idea that no, there's one person here that he might have made a difference to. He like his presence at this fight, doing this, might have inspired this one person, even if it is through fear rather than like, you know, be good and be, you know, the Superman way. He's inspired someone to maybe second guess their life choice, and you know, at the very least, don't hurt innocent people. Like if there's one fundamental thing you shouldn't be doing that's worse than, you know, being a thief or whatever else, don't hurt people. Don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it really comes down to for his entire arc in this movie, is the only way he knows how to inspire change at all is through fear. That's his one mode of pushing any sort of progress forward. So his arc is to figure out, are there other ways to do that, and what happens when that doesn't work and or makes things worse.
Well, yeah, what's so beautiful about the arc, you know, since we're sort of spiraling back into this, and this is this is back out of the Riddler side of things, is, you know, we have the Riddler murdering more people. He eventually kills Falcone. We'll talk more about Falcone, I think, in the Catwoman plot, but they chase Riddler. He lets himself be caught because he just goes to a diner and he's you know, he's making the question mark in the coffee as he does, and the whole thing with, and we'll go back and talk about the scene at Arkham and all that, because I think that's really important. But is the idea that, you know, a few times throughout the film, Batman says the line, "I am vengeance." That's his like catchphrase that he's saying to people to scare them. And when we find out the Riddler is doing what he does, and he's planned this bigger attack, he's been on essentially like 8chan or 4chan or dark web, talking to other extremists, and he's been getting advice off other people, and he's got followers, and it really presents this idea of gaining a following because you're extreme, and the idea that, and this is something that's used a lot in Batman, especially with Joker and early Batman stories, is the idea that Batman's presence inspires the creative side of other people. It's like, oh, you can be a larger than life character now and do something like this. and that inspires someone like the Joker. So Riddler,
in the words of Batman Begins, what about escalation?
Yeah, there you go. But here it's kind of this specific thing about how your actions and what you present to the world influences others. And because Batman's not really controlling like his message, he's just saying I am vengeance and beating people up. He's effectively appealing to an extreme end of the spectrum. He's appealing to people who want to use violence. He's appealing to people who think it is just about vengeance. And, you know, Riddler thinks Batman's going to be cool with them because he's killing people. That's what Batman wants. Help me kill the bad guys, Batman. Like, that's what he thinks. We're going to teach this city a lesson. That's what he is leaning towards, and he's gaining this following, and you really get this idea of terrorist cells and extremist movements and mass murderers and things like that. So it all boils down to when Batman's making his big save, and we'll talk about that, I think, separately as a scene. But the moment he hears one of these like Riddler followers who are helping like kill people at the end, when someone asks the Riddler follower when they've taken off his Riddler mask, like, what are you? Who are you? He says, I am vengeance. And the Batman looking down and saying, and just seeing what he has done, like, in some level he is responsible for creating this, because he created this idea that you can be this type of larger than life character, and he's inspired this, and that he has to show people what he actually stands for, that this is not on, that he does not approve of these tactics, he does not approve of these people, which leads to one of the most beautiful scenes in a Batman film, where, you know, the building's flooding in the arena, and he ends up down in the bottom, and the movie starts with him coming out of a shadow, and everyone's scared of him walking out of shadows. So what do we do to thematically close his arc? We have him be the one who leads people into the light. He lights a flare, and he puts his hand out, and he says, he doesn't even say anything, but, you know, effectively he's saying, I'll lead you to safety. And they're hesitant, but then ultimately this girl or woman at the front accepts his hand, and then he leads people out. And there's that great top-down shot of him leading people through the water as he's holding the flare, and like the shadow of like all the people behind them, to the point where it almost looked like Batwings behind them. Yeah, you know.
And not to sort the point, but I do believe the first person was actually the boy from the very beginning. Like, I think that was the first person who took his hand out of the wreckage, was that boy whose father was killed as the first victim of the Riddler.
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right, because it's him, and then it's like the new
mayoral,
mayor,
electoral, whatever.
Yeah, because she's like, you know, the one against the corrupt mayor, and so she's seen as a more, you know, good character in the movie.
Yeah,
and, you know, and from there we see like he's out in daylight, he's helping carry like injured kids to helicopter stretchers and stuff.
The National Guard came in, and he's carrying them all out off the roof.
Yeah, and like we see like a moment where he puts like a girl down on the stretcher, and she sort of like grabs his arm, like she's scared, not of him, she's scared of like being hurt, and like he just kind of like holds her hand a little bit, and just to say, you'll be okay. Again, he doesn't say it, he just like gives her the look, you'll be okay. And it's this idea that he's publicly doing something where the city can see him as a heroic figure, that he stands for something, and he's making it clear what he stands for, that this is not about just raising fear and terror. Yes, he's going to use fear still, absolutely he's going to, but he's going to inspire some hope in other people, and it's the idea that the good people don't have to fear him. This is about being a bad guy, effectively. I mean, to put it in comic book terms, don't be a bad guy.
Pretty much. It's being able to put on the different faces when he needs to. It's being able to care for people when it's necessary and otherwise. Didn't want to interrupt that role, because yes, all of it, 100%.
Yeah, beautiful. It's all beautiful.
Yeah. But just going back real quick to the Riddlers and the extremists and stuff like that, what gets me is that to mirror the Batman that we have in this movie, we gushed so long about his outfit and how it was all basically handpicked, and it was just things that you could find. But as a rich person, the Riddler's outfit, love it or hate it, they specifically showed in the movie that like this was picked up at like military surplus stores. Like, it was stuff that, again, a normal person could just go out and get and deal with. But it is shoddier because it is a guy who's just a guy. He's not rich, he's not wealthy, he's just able to get this stuff on a shoestring budget, and what he's able to do with that. So there are still the mirrors there of Batman and the Riddler.
Yeah, you see like the prototypes like lying around and stuff of his traps and his like games that he makes people play. There's that. I think it's the corrupt DA or cop, whatever one he sends to the funeral. But he puts him in this like
that was the DA, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe it's the one before, but the one with who has the thing in the head, where he's got the head thing on with the poison.
That was the commissioner. Right. Yeah.
Like you see like the prototypes of that lying around, and if I have a critique at all about the Riddler stuff, is that I think it's fair to say that maybe some of the solutions, like the idea that he knew someone would find the solution to propel the next part of like his game, the Batman's on in his journey, is maybe a little far-fetched. Don't get me wrong, like they don't feel super solvable sometimes, and I think that's a fair critique.
Yes and no. From my perspective of things, I think that all of this game revolved around Batman solving them. Because again, all of the riddles, everything that sent things forward, were all in the cards that said to the Batman. Like nothing was forwarded via a cop doing something or anything else. It was all down to the Batman solving the riddles. And a lot of times, especially with the one that they brought up over and over of a lot of rata, which is basically just telling him, look for the rat, look for the person who got Maroni off the streets. He got that wrong. He got that wrong like 3 times. Yeah. He was just hoping that he would eventually stumble across it.
Because it's Falcone. That's how it ultimately turns out to be. It's Falcone.
Exactly. And a falcon, of course, was what the with wings was supposed to be pointing to. But he goes to like Penguin first. He goes to a bunch of other people. There was eventually he got to. In fact, he didn't even get to Falcone. Falcone was just kind of dropped in his lap.
I when I heard that and he said a rat with wings, I was like, well, that's a bat, right? That was my first thought.
That's of course the intention.
But I mean, obviously it makes sense because I think the penguin thing is like the whole point is that he's the rat and he has wings. Not that a penguin is a rat with wings.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But that's just the different ways he's just trying to interpret it. What I like about this Riddler Batman dynamic, and what I genuinely think this does a great job with the Riddler for, is that Batman doesn't always get it.
No, yeah.
Because he's well trained in like some form of fighting, but he's not like ninja trained. He's pretty smart. He's pretty well read, but he's not the smartest guy ever. This Batman is a Batman who's still coming up, who's still learning things. And so when he goes up against the guy who is actually the smartest guy in the room, he genuinely does not have all the pieces by the time the final confrontation comes. So there was the point at the end where he's telling Batman, like, and now our final part of my plan can commence. And Batman's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, come on, man. I gave you everything. How did you... you're not that smart, are you? Like, they literally have that scene. And that's something that I think has always been missing from the Riddlers in the movies, is that Batman has always stood on equal footing as the Riddler in terms of intellect. He's always been able to solve the riddles and beat Riddler at his own game. But he didn't in this one. He straight up was not up to the task of handling these riddles.
Yeah, because it's after that scene where he talks to him at Arkham, where he goes to his house again and then investigates and finds the stuff in the computer chat rooms and whatever. Right. Yeah, but that scene in Arkham, though, is exceptionally well done. And, you know, it's hard not to compare it to something like the Batman Joker scene in Dark Knight, because it's the idea of, like, you've caught the villain and they have a one-to-one chat. And you know, in that case, it was a police station. In this case, it's Arkham, but it's the same difference. Yeah. What's so good about this one, Dano's performance is good, for a start. I think he's very good in the role. There's a sort of great fake out here where it sounds like he's saying he knows that Batman's Bruce Wayne, and Batman clearly thinks that as well. And he looks up to the camera, he's like, wait, is that recording audio? Like, are other people hearing what he's saying right now? But then there's like a sort of moment of relief where it turns out he's not calling him Bruce Wayne, he's just yelling about Bruce Wayne, because Bruce Wayne... He's like, he's the fake orphan. Like, people say he's an orphan just like I was, but no. He grew up in a mansion with a butler. Like that's not being an orphan. And he goes on this rant about how like he's the worst because of that. And it's a really well done little sequence where like Batman legitimately looks like shit scared that he's figured out who he is.
Oh yeah, and that's. You were saying that in the beginning, is that this costume allows for a lot more like of the eyes to be able to show emotion. And yeah, that was 100% throughout that entire scene, between the scare that he was figured out, the anger of not getting straight answers from the Riddler, and then the confusion of, wait, there's more.
Yeah.
All of that is sold through the eyes.
All great stuff, because he's got very little dialogue in that scene, but it's still very effective. So I mean, that's most of the Riddler stuff, really. Obviously, the big action set piece that comes out of this is that him and his comrades, if you will, have blew up the dams around the city so that they start flooding. So they've got a lot of people in the arena to try and get away from the water, but it starts flooding. There's a great action sequence because Riddler sent all these people that follow Riddler are going there to just start shooting people from the rafters. So it's a very almost really dark, like true to life kind of like plan.
Oh yeah.
I felt the severity of it. But Batman ends up fighting them up there. And it's a great sequence of him fighting these guys up there where he's like, again, he's getting hit with bullets and he's like throwing a gun at someone's head and like just punching, and it feels quite visceral. Catwoman does kind of come back at the story here a little bit to show up and save the day a little, which is cool. I guess the one thing that maybe they could have done to make it feel like Catwoman was more of a, even though our story with Falcone was done already at this point, if she'd maybe learned something in this, or maybe like come to agree with Batman in something in this final like set of sequences that may have like justified.
Honestly, the whole thing just came down of stopping Batman. I think it wasn't she the thing of once he was knocked out or whatever, she was like, hey, you're good, you fix the problem, stay down, stop killing yourself for this. That was pretty much the only point she served being there.
But he has his big emotional moment where he saves the people and they all get to see him being heroic. The other big Riddler scene before this though, which was heavily hinted at in the trailers, is the funeral scene where they all go to the funeral of the mayor, the ex-mayor, or the dead mayor. That's if you call him an ex-mayor at that point. But they go to the funeral. Bruce is there as Bruce. There's others, and it also sets up that there's a guy that he thinks might be the Riddler. We know it's not because we know it's Paul Dano, but it's obviously one of the followers. I think it's actually the guy you see at the end, like up in the rafters of the arena. It may be the same actor. But this idea that there's like some people there who agree that with the Riddler or hate like the mayor and hate like, and they're becoming extremists. But the car comes in and it's the Riddler has set up the corrupt DA as a trap, and he wants Batman to come in and talk to him. And the whole sequence is very good. And the whole point of it is that Riddler just wants the guy to admit like a bunch of things, admit how much he stole money wise, or how much he was paid off to like look the other way. And he answers all the questions until the last one, which is like, who's the rat? And he's not willing to do it because he thinks his family will be hurt if he gives up who the rat is.
Because it's like a citywide conspiracy.
So the bomb ultimately goes off, and that whole sequence is very good, but it leads to like a really interesting scene where Batman gets knocked out and the police actually take his unconscious body to the station. And obviously my first question is like, well, is no one going to try to unmask him? But immediately like Gordon's in there like, no, you take your hands off that mask. Like he's there like running defense for him the entire time.
And even then, as soon as we see him come back to consciousness, as soon as someone just touches his ear, he's up off that table ready to punch someone. Yeah, and it's like a tiny room full of like 50 cops. it's like they are not taking this guy lightly. Like they're ready to fight like in mass if they need to. And ultimately, they're not willing to let him go or like play ball with them. And Gordon says, like, let me talk to him alone. I'll get him to like do stuff. And Gordon immediately is like, all right, if you go out that door, you get to the rooftop. You're going to have to hit me to make it look good. And it's like there's not a lot of humor in it, but there is some little funny moments where, so he punches Gordon so that Gordon doesn't look like he's letting him go. And then next time he sees Gordon back at the bat signal, he's like, you could have pulled that punch, you didn't have to like hit me that hard. And Batman's like, I did. Oh yeah, that was the real punchline there. Yeah, that was perfect. Just on that scene though, it goes into another thing of one of my major problems I had with the Nolan movies was there was always a device. There was always a thing that was just a bit too far for the world that they established. There was the microwave emitter. There was the sonar with the phones. That's fair. That's fair. And there was the nuke, obviously. But there was always a device. This movie, he got up to the roof. The cops are chasing him. There's no way off for him. And it's worth mentioning, he's clearly never been stood up on a gargoyle before that scene because he looked shit scared. Yeah, he was like, oh, geez, okay. But he gets up there, and then I'm imagining the entire Batman Begins part of the fabric that you send the current through, and then it turns into the glider, and you're able to just glide off.
I do still love that gadget in particular because I thought it looked good, and it looked like the bat wings, and it looked like the bat symbol flying through the air whenever he put it out. Right. So it was good.
Yeah,
but this is different. This is more practical. This is more.
Oh yeah. So as soon as he gets up there, he pulls a string or whatever on his utility belt, and he just essentially turns into an inflatable like life raft, but for a wingsuit. Like it's fully inflated. It comes off the sides of his suit, and he just has a wingsuit that he jumps down, and you can see him mapping out the plan in his head of all I need to do is grapple onto that bus, and then like the inertia, I'll be able to like slow down on it. Cool, let's do that. And he goes and he uses a grapple hook. I think he hits whatever he was aiming at, but he misjudged how far the bus would be, and he like slams into a bridge and gets all messed up. And going back to Batman Earth 1 for the last time, the first few pages of that book are Batman completely misjudging a jump and falling down into an alley and then just laying there completely bruised up, like just saying ow to himself. And that's what I felt that moment was. And all the quintessential, this is a DIY Batman who just put all this together because he thought, I might need this. This is the quintessential moment of while he may feel like he's in control of things, he may be able to do whatever, this was a moment that he had no control over, and he was just lucky to make it out alive.
Yeah, and you know, you say he sort of pulls a string, and I think he zips the cape up because it sort of like comes in and closes.
Exactly.
So yeah, it looks like a wingsuit, and it's like, okay, this is actually like a real thing that people do.
Right.
It's a thing that exists. I mean, honestly though, the only time I spotted like a bit of visual effect that didn't hold up completely to my eye was when he landed, because it was clearly a CG Batman rolling. Yeah. And I thought, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I understand why it's CG, but it was the only moment in the whole movie where I went, oh, there's CG there. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's other examples that do exist as CG, but that was the only one I noticed and went, oh, that was CG.
Yeah, but I mean, that was just in terms of the writing. Yes, there were the moments earlier on, and you see him in his outfit and stuff like that, implying that this is a Batman who, while he has been around, he hasn't yet become the true, like, Batman that we know. He's still learning. That was the moment that I felt really salted of. He may be in over his head. And then it only from that point on really elaborated on that. It really kept building of, like, Riddler's got stuff over his head. He has no idea of his own family history. He has no, like, he is so much more in the dark than he thought he was about not only his city, but his own personal life. And I mean, it really started with the scene of the cops taking him in and the bomb going off. But that was where it started of, this is not a Batman who is in control of things, as we typically see Batman always being one step ahead of everybody. Yeah.
And that's something I'd expect to see in, if not the direct sequel, maybe if this is a trilogy, the third one, to actually get a sense of, like, him being a step ahead of the villain, whoever it is, and, like, having that badass kind of I'm Batman bitch moment. Not saying that, obviously, because that's terrible, but that effective moment. And I don't know how much we're going to jump ahead timeline wise when we go to a second movie. Is it right after? Is it going a little bit ahead in his career so we can have more changes? I mean, I don't know, but I like that is a really standout scene because it does feel so distinctly different and more like, just like I say, DIY Batman effectively. So no, good stuff. Yeah, I think that's most of the Riddler stuff. I suppose the other thing is that what's revealed about is that there was like a trust fund thing kind of set up that the Thomas Wayne was doing, that as soon as he died, all of like the corrupt cops and like judges in the city all decided to start using to just like put all their dodgy money through. All the dirty money goes through this fund thing. Yeah. And it's like,
I mean, not even that. It was just the fact of basically Thomas put this massive fortune out there of like, hey, $1 billion to Gotham, use it without all the bureaucratic red tape. Just use it to improve Gotham. And because it didn't have that bureaucratic red tape, everyone was able to just go in and be like, I'll have that, sure, yoink, and then not do anything about it. So that was what ended up funding all of the like mayoral campaigns. It ended up funding some of the mobsters' rise to power, and that's where the entire Riddler's plot hinges upon, is that these were all the people who were involved in, I think it was like the Initiative Fund, I think it was called, and all the people who were involved with that. That's why Riddler sees Thomas Wayne as corrupt, not because he inherently did anything. It doesn't even tie into the Falcone incident. It all came down to the fact of he's the one who made this fund that made the city so much worse.
Yeah. And I don't think he knows that he was innocent of any of this, because he is innocent in the sense that he didn't, he genuinely set that up as a good thing, but then it was misused by... And
I'm sure if he was still around to manage it, it would have been a good thing.
I'm sure he would have had something to say about it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's super interesting. But yeah, there's the stuff that's set up there. Obviously, I think at one point someone said they're a fan of Court Orwell's, and it does feel like setting up the family history in Gotham feels like it might be setting up some Court Orwell stuff. Also, the name Elliot, I do believe, was mentioned.
Yeah, that was the name of the reporter. The reporter's name, I believe, was Thomas Elliot, that he was going to have killed, and of course did have killed.
Yeah.
But specifically during that scene, because it was told via a visual montage that Riddler put together, as that part was going on, he said Thomas used it as a hush money, and he made sure to have the word hush appear on screen. So I'm losing my mind during that part.
Yeah. If you don't know, Thomas Elliot plays as a villain called Hush. That is a big arc in the Batman comic where he tries to basically rob Bruce's life away from him.
Right.
So really interested to see if they go down that path.
That's the one I feel really has the biggest odds. Just from, they specifically put the word Hush there. We have a thing of how much Bruce Wayne is there really to Batman already pre-set up. I feel like it fits in perfectly to the universe. I think in general
make a good movie, although steampunk Mr. Freeze is my number one wish.
I mean, we had 3 villains in this movie if you count Catwoman as a villain, so we can have a couple. And then the final one, I don't even know if you would consider this as a thing, but during the Batman is knocked down, he is out, Catwoman is being attacked by one of the Riddler's goons, and she's putting up a fight but is not able to do so, and Batman pulls something out of his utility belt that looks like a green liquid of sorts, and then injects himself with it, to which he is immediately up and very brutally attacking this guy.
I know where you're going. I think this is a stretch. This is just
I don't know.
I think this is just adrenaline. This is just adrenaline to get him up off the ground.
That's what I think so too, if they ever don't want to take that path. But I think that it is the fact that it was green. They could have made that any color.
Okay, you think the
fact that it was green.
Just to state this clearly for everyone's not getting what David's saying, David is implying that this is some early form of venom, which is what Bane uses.
And the only reason I also think that is because in the Bat comics, Venom was introduced long before Bane.
That's true.
Venom was introduced in a story arc all about just Venom, and it was just a street drug that Batman got hooked on because it made him stronger and faster and better. I think that would be a perfect fit in this world as well. Batman is pushing himself so hard that he needs something to keep going. And then this presents itself.
Could we get a third movie Bane before we even get like the first Clayface?
Yeah, it's possible.
That would be wild. But I mean, I wouldn't be against it. I mean, Bane's a great character.
Oh yeah, sure.
But as far as for a mix of different reasons, but one mainly just being that I would like a cool Mr. Freeze. I think a steampunk Mr. Freeze would be yeah. I know I said cool, no pun intended, but yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, so we have to talk about Catwoman a bit. We have to talk about some of those other elements, the detective elements. Because when he goes to see Catwoman for the first time, and so one of the big driving forces of the movie, I don't even mention this yet, but Catwoman's roommate is the girl who was photographed with the mayor. So the mayor was having like a fling with a girl at the club, and it's Catwoman's roommate. Everyone's kind of after her. She disappears very early on, and because she's what she wants to find out where her roommate is, and because she cares about that, she's willing to help Batman. So Selina agrees to go undercover because she already works at the club as Selina. So she goes in with the contact lenses on and has an earpiece and all the rest of it, and goes in, and Batman's monitoring from like a van, just watching what she's seeing and talking to her. And even that felt really comic booky to me, as them working together like this. But and this is skipping ahead, but I really liked, because eventually when Batman's pushing too hard about her connection to Falcone, obviously she later reveals that it's her father, and I knew that because comics. But later on, I love that she like turns it on and just has a note saying, "I need to see you," for him to find. I just like that detail.
Yeah. So just anytime he comes back to the camera, he can just oh hey.
Yeah, it's another form of a bat signal, effectively, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
In fact, she also uses that, actually, because at one point later on, the bat signal's on, and Gordon and Batman both show up at the where it is at the same time, go, wait, that's not you? And Gordon's like, pulls out his gun, he's like, let's go up, let's find out who this is. And it's Selina wanting to kill the corrupt cop.
Kenzie.
Oh, there you go.
His name.
And Batman stops her, of course, doesn't let her do it. She does try to kick him off the roof, but... it's not the roof quite, but it's high up on this building site.
You say try to. I mean, she does.
Yeah.
She does straight up kick him, but then she uses that as her escape so that she can go to Falcone before Batman, or because during that scene is the big reveal of pretty much the entire plot. Pretty much.
Yeah. They're basically realizing what all the corruption is, and it's a race to get to Falcone. Selina's going there to like murder him, and because it is his daughter. Although I didn't actually realize that Falcone didn't know that. I thought the reason why Falcone like spoke to her at all earlier on is because he knew it was his daughter, but so it was actually quite dark to me later on when she sort of revealed it, and it was like a sort of like shocking moment for me. I was like, wait, you were flirting with her because you thought she was hot? Oh no.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to make a scumbag. That's an effective one.
He was trying to get with it. I mean, he didn't know it was his daughter, but it's still creepy. It's still like...
Then again, she also... I believe that during that first encounter, he also said something along the lines of like, oh, it's been a while since I've seen you around here, da-da-da. So clearly she had been trying to get close to him for a while, for whatever reason. And of course, Catwoman's whole plot, just in between there, is that she was... Falcone... Okay, going back further, Maroni was taken down because of a drug. I think it was called like poppers or something.
Yeah, that's like a sort of movie drug. Yeah,
just whatever it's called. And basically, they thought that once they put Maroni away, all those drugs were taken off the street. But then it's revealed that Falcone just picked up right where they left off, and it never even stopped. And so Catwoman is orchestrating a massive heist of the money that's being used to buy these drugs, basically because she believes she's owed it by virtue of her father being Falcone. So that's essentially the general everything of her plot. And I may be mistaken, but I believe she gets away with it. I think she gets away with a duffel bag full of money. I don't remember her ever giving it back. So
I think she gets at least. I think she had like a couple of bags, and then because this is the scene at least of the car chase with the Batmobile, and there's like a gunfight. But when she's leaving on the motorbike, she does grab one bag. So I think she only gets like half of it. But I mean, yeah, she does. Yeah, she does get away with a duffel bag of money.
Yeah, and I mean, should we just real quick on that chase scene with the Batmobile?
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's perfect, man.
They build it up. Yeah, they build it up like it feels like a louder version of the main theme plays, and it's all sort of done from the perspective of Penguin trying to get away from him, and Penguin being reckless and trying to cause accidents on the motorway to crash Batman, and he thinks he gets, and it's in that trailer as well, actually, that first trailer where, or maybe it's the second trailer, but it's where like he thinks he's got Batman because there's the big explosion because the tanker goes up, and he's like, I got you, and then the Batmobile comes flying out the fire.
God, that shot. I saw this with my girlfriend, and she doesn't know anything about this stuff. She's not huge on comic book movies in general, but when that shot happened, all I see from the chair next to me, because I'm glued to the screen, but all I see from the chair next to me is her hand going. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's fair. I understand, but like, shut up.
To be fair, though, there is a shot that clearly shows why it jumps, because it's like the back of one of those trucks that that cars get transported on, and you just see it kind of fall into place. Like it's almost a little eye rolly that it perfectly forms a ramp, but it does form a ramp. You see a ramp be made.
Like he's going to be jumping through those flames. But the moment it happened is not taken away at all.
No.
You're just like, that is, chef's kiss, perfect.
Yes.
And then, of course, he runs into Penguin's car. He, like, flips it over. And then you get that long saunter with the metal boots just hitting the ground as he walks towards the car. I mean, that scene just straight up, that's what sold that Batmobile for me as...
Yeah. And there's a lot of comedy as well, because when they're done interrogating Penguin and realize he wasn't the rat, they just leave him there where the bat signal is, and he's like tied up. He's got no like phone or anything. He's like, "You're just going to leave me here, guys?" And he just starts yelling things, and it just made me laugh. It was funny.
Of course, he's tied up on his feet as well, so he literally has to waddle after them.
Yeah, he's waddling like a penguin. No, it's great. All that was really entertaining, and so there's this race to get to Falcone. Catwoman wants to murder him. Batman's racing there, and that's where we get a lot of the action stuff, where he's going through the hallway of darkness and taking out all the bad guys, because she's able to get in because she's supposed to be there, and Falcone will let her in to see him under the guise of he's a horny old bastard. Whereas Batman, of course, they're going to try and stop. So he's sort of like against the time, but he turns off the lights at one point, so she's already made her move. Falcone knows she's trying to kill him, but they're in darkness, so he's kind of sneaking around her a little bit. And Batman does eventually get in there. Although there's a moment where Falcone lets slip that he also killed her mother, because that's one of the things, is that she feels like her mother was mistreated by Falcone. Turns out he was literally the one who killed her. He's like, I have to strangle you just like your mother. Like, he says something like that.
Yeah, and that was also the thing of why she was really dead set at that particular moment, was she heard a phone recording that set the whole reveal into motion of her friend on the phone,
the roommate,
the roommate that was lost, being strangled by Falcone. That and just very viscerally, all the little noises and stuff like that before she finally hangs it up. And I'm like, okay, I'd be pissed. I understand where she's coming from.
No, she's got motivation, like, for sure. There's no doubt in that. So
but of course she's going after Falcone with a gun the whole time, which is of course a big no-no to Batman. So by the end of the scene, she the moment I've mentioned before that I know from the comics is Catwoman always at some point has to use her claws to scar Falcone. Like, that's just the thing, and she does that here. She digs her nails into his face, but as she's finally got the leg up and is going to try to kill Falcone, Batman comes in and just says, like, no, stop it, let him face real justice. Like, you're done here. You're
and
good.
this leads to a big moment, because right before this, when they're on the rooftop and they're hearing the recordings, and they've like basically gotten all the exposition of what the conspiracy's been, and how much the police force are corrupt, and Gordon's sickened by it, Batman's sickened by it. And the last time Batman was with the rest of the police is when they were all chasing him at the police station. Like, they were determined to bring him in. When they take Falcone out of this building, out of the Iceberg Lounge, and Falcone's being cocky, well, I'll get out in 10 minutes. Don't you know that the police force in this city work for me? Like, I'm the one they work for. And they open the door, and Gordon's standing there with a good amount of like police, and he just says, not all of them. And the idea being that Gordon has went and assembled all of the honest cops, like all the ones who are good enough that they're going to help take him down. And
it's a lot of them.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like, okay, these are the ones that might not try to take Batman in. These are the ones who... So, like, it's a nice payoff to that. And then, of course, there's a sniper. Riddler sniper kills him. So Falcone dies anyway. But that spirals us into the rest of the plot with Riddler and all the big climax stuff. But, it does...
But again, that is the issue, though, as we brought up before, is that is the end of Catwoman's development. And we still have the entire third act to go. So that was the one structural issue of there is nothing more for Catwoman to do beyond that point, and there's no real easy way to shuffle things around to get her more later. Yeah,
beyond just ultimately be willing to jump in and help effectively, which I do think is an important part of Catwoman, is that she is willing to help Batman when people are in danger. Like, I think it's fine to have a moment like that. But I do kind of agree. It did feel like her story was just done, like in terms of like her growing as a character, which is why I'd say maybe if like Batman proved to her in some way in that final act of like maybe not killing people or something, where maybe she also got some of that point, just so that it felt like she had like a final beat in that sense. But like, you know, it is a relatively minor quibble in this grand scheme of things, because it does feel like this epic where there's these like the city feels alive because you have the corruption, you have Falcone's connection to Catwoman, you have the connection to the Wayne parents, you have the connection to why Riddler's motivated to do all this stuff, and you have the fight for the good cops versus the corrupt cops and all the rest of it. All of this is all coexisting and sort of spiraling into each other constantly throughout the movie, and that's what kind of makes it feel impressive, and part of what made it feel like a sort of 6-issue arc to me, where I wouldn't suggest breaking it up into 6 parts, but I believe you could, and it would feel like each one has a significant event in them to like make it feel like they're worth viewing in that way.
Oh, definitely. It's what is it? It's the what was that Tarantino movie? Hateful Eight, I believe it was.
Sure.
That it was split into like sections, like literal sections, and when they did the extended version on Netflix, they stopped the movie for it and they turned it into a mini series of those 4 sections. So I don't think that this would help in watching the movie at all, but it is a concept of you could take this particular section, and despite the fact that it is a narrative flow, it is moving on, I think that having the end of the scene of Catwoman versus Falcone being the end of an issue would make it feel a whole lot better of that being the end of Catwoman's arc, and then having the next issue pick up with him being walked out.
It totally would. Like, I can imagine that final full page spread of Falcone's body lying in the ground with Batman over him as the final page of the penultimate issue, perhaps of the comic series. Like, it feels that way.
I don't know if they still have these, but there used to be the whole thing of like the movie adaptations into novels. I want one of this. Just get Sorrentino again on art, because it would fit perfectly, and just do this beat for beat. 6 issues, I'd love it.
Yeah. And I'm just saying 6 because that's the common length. Maybe it's 7.
Yeah.
If I actually broke it down and like thought about it, maybe it'd be 7. But the point of that, I mean, it's not just because it's authentic to comic book storytelling. It's more, the point is more just that it's not a 3-act structure. There's more than that. And sometimes that can be a stumbling block for anything that tries to do something more creative, because those general rules are followed and exist for a reason, is because they're safety nets. But it doesn't mean that you can't make more unique structures work and you can't make other ideas and styles work. And I think this largely does. This does work.
For sure.
I was engaged
the only thing
the whole time.
The only thing that really surprised me was the movie's bookended by the narration.
Yes.
It's there at the very beginning, it's there at the very end. And I believe the date he puts at the very end is November 6th.
It's like a week, yeah.
This whole thing is a week, and I like that concept of that. Like, all this stuff happened so quickly, but it's amazing to me that all this stuff did happen so quickly. And like, if
there's one thing I know for sure about the second movie, is that it has to start and end with narration.
Oh yeah, no, that has to be a motif that carries over everything. That
has to be the same again in every one of these movies that are part of this series now. Sure. I'd be disappointed if it wasn't. So, so I suppose we could talk about the one scene that I don't like.
Yeah, I know. Now that you tell me where it's located, I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Don't get me wrong, I also had one of the biggest sighs of relief during this scene as well. And I'll tell you why. So before this movie came out, there was rumors / people campaigning for either Jared Leto to appear as the Joker or Joaquin Phoenix to appear as the Joker. And I can't tell you, for as much as I'm going to complain about this scene, I cannot tell you the relief I felt when it was clearly not one of those two.
Right.
I felt so relieved. I was like,
I get that. See, I mean, my opinions on Joaquin Phoenix are a bit different than yours, but if I heard that from Jared Leto, I would have left the theater right then. Like, I would not have gotten that heartwarming moment on the roof.
Doesn't matter that the rest of it was exceptional. That would have ruined the whole thing.
I wouldn't have seen Batman and Catwoman going their separate ways on motorbikes. Now, just there was Jared Leto Joker, and that's all I need to know.
I think for one, I would have cut this out and put it as the mid or post credit scene, just because it felt so separate and it just kind of ruined the flow a little bit of the ending. But also because I have heard the theory that because Reeves is a big fan of the '66 Batman movie, and the Joker being here means that every villain from that movie is also in this one, is a neat touch, and maybe kind of inspires beyond just the sequel bait or the we want to have a Joker cameo bait of it. Fair enough, I can appreciate that, but it doesn't change the fact that it cut to Arkham, Riddler's in his cell, and I'm like, we're about to get a Joker tease, because that's why we're cutting back to Arkham. There's no other reason here. Like, obviously it cuts back to Riddler's reaction when he sees Batman on the news being a hero, and it kind of makes him freak out, and he screams, and that was entertaining, and he's got a good performance. But you hear this voice, and I think it's a combination of a couple of things. One, it feels a little tacked on that we're doing the Joker tease, because we don't need it. Like, we know we're going to get a Joker. There's no successful Batman trilogy or series of movies that is not going to do a Joker. It's just never going to happen.
I mean, I'm okay with them not doing the Joker. I just it goes back to everything I said before.
I'm okay with them not doing it.
If it's a good story, I'm okay with it.
I'm okay with them not doing it, but they're always going to. So just accept it.
For sure.
So, and part of the problem is that the perfect tease for a Joker was already done at the end of Batman Begins. You're never topping them on the rooftop at the signal. Something's going on. Here's the playing card. Shit, it's time for Joker.
That was basically year one minus the playing card. But that was...
Yeah. That is the perfect tease of the Joker. So having like him give this weird little speech to sort of make Riddler feel better, and that Gotham's a place for us crazies to do things, or I don't remember the exact wording, but it's a combination of it feeling tacked on, of it feeling like I've already had the perfect sequel tease for a Joker, so this just feels a bit iffy. I didn't love the voice that I heard so far.
Yeah, I mean, from what I looked, just from what I was able to make out, because they keep him pretty much completely in shadow the whole time.
You see it's like the slot in the door, like where they put their foot through. You see like a little bit of like his mouth at one point, and it looks like he's got the scarring.
Exactly. It looks like they actually went through with the idea of, okay, what if a man fell into a vat of acid? How would he look?
No, but he's not got the white paint though.
No, I couldn't tell color. Personally,
he did not have the white paint. This was veering more towards Heath Ledger. He's got scarring on his mouth, but he paints his face.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying is that I thought it was scarring. I thought it looked like more of his face was scarred than just his mouth.
It looked like it was more over the top. But
but point being is that I'm okay with what I've got from the visual, which is just a very small amount. But like you said, the voice was majority of it. He was just talking to the Riddler through the slot, and you're right in that I don't know what it was, and I've only ever seen clips of it, but it reminded me of the Joker, or I guess they never actually called him Joker, but that character from the Gotham TV show, where it just felt like it's someone trying to do a Joker. It is not a Joker.
Yeah,
that's how it came off to me.
I wonder if they're married to this actor they've got for the next one or whatever. Because honestly, if they never do Joker again and it was just this little scene, like I would think that was cool, except for the fact that I think he's not very good. But I would think it was cool, the idea that you just have a Joker in Arkham to establish that one day there'll be a Joker. But we're not going to do it because we've done it too many times, so we're just going to do other villains. But I'm okay with there being a Joker. I'm okay with him being a big part of the second or third movie, whatever one you want to focus on the Joker. That's cool. I just wasn't in love with what I heard, or even the writing of what this Joker was saying. It just felt a little bit weird, and the idea that he's like, I don't know, like...
Yeah, I kept waiting for him to do something off of like riddles and jokes, and like just make some actual joke at some point in there.
He said too much. I honestly, I think the camera just going across to the next door and just having the name say unknown and just hearing maybe a little bit of a laugh would have been way more effective to me than this monologue that he gives to Riddler.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember it offhand, but I know that there's a cell number in Arkham that's always associated with the Joker. If you just like panned over and showed that number and then that's it. Like even then that would just be, yeah, sure, nobody else would like get it. It would just be for the comics fans, but at the same point, I don't know. This always struck me, and it's been striking me ever since it came out. whenever they do stuff like this is the Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Of just walking down the hall of the entire Sinister Six. And I'm like...
I think that's why it hurts, because the rest of this movie, despite the fact that it's a Batman movie and obviously it's going to make a lot of money, it's going to get sequels, they've already announced TV spin-offs, it doesn't feel like a mass-produced, off a factory line movie. It feels like a director's movie. It feels like it has its own unique style, tone. It feels like a real film. And I know that sounds a bit pretentious, but I mean it. I really do mean it. And I think this scene feels like, no, this is a scene that Disney put in a Marvel movie to tease their expanded universe, or like you just gave, the Sony version of, we're going to do the expanded Sinister Six with all these villains. This scene felt kind of like that in a movie that otherwise completely avoided feeling like that.
Yeah,
and I think that's the big disappointment of this scene existing is.
Yeah, I mean, when you really boil it down, though, I think the biggest difference between this scene in this movie as compared to the last scene in Batman Begins is that the way that scene was played was, yes, it felt like it was teasing the Joker in Batman's future. It didn't inherently feel like they were teasing the next movie. I don't know why it is. I don't know. I can't point to a specific thing of it being like, hey, this is just something that Batman is going to face soon. It's not something that you may see. Whereas this feels like it is specifically, nope, this is exactly what you're going to get in the next movie. And I can't point to exactly what it is, but I feel like that's what lets it down a little bit of just that over cockiness. After so many times, especially in DC, we've been disappointed with, oh, no, don't worry, it's definitely going to work this time, guys. It's just that over cockiness that we're like, can we please just pump the brakes a little bit?
I disagree slightly, just in the sense that on Batman Begins, I do think it feels like they're saying Joker's the next movie, but I think, one, you've just gotten a great version of Batman's origin, and they're saying you're going to get to see what this version of Batman's Joker is. It's genuinely exciting. And at that point, we were not sick of the Joker yet, but as a world at large, there wasn't overexposure of Joker at that point. Right. It's a little bit different now, right? Where there's been a Joker movie that's been this weird own project, plus there's been a Joker in the Snyder stuff, plus Joker's used constantly in the comics, he's used on the TV shows. There's a lot of Joker. But I don't mind there being a Joker. I don't mind them doing Joker. I think at this point, though, we don't really have to tease him, and I certainly don't think you wanted to give him a monologue where you're kind of nailing down what the voice and like kind of like version of Joker is going to be. Leave that open a little bit, because by far the thing I dislike the most in this movie, maybe the only thing I outright dislike, is this Joker scene.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's really, if you told me like, okay, start at 100%, like this, give this movie a rating at 100% or 10 out of 10, and then just tick off things for every fault it has, I wouldn't have that many, but that last scene would definitely be one of them. That would be the one nick in the armor that I would definitely put in of like, no, that didn't need to be there. And you say it would work as a post-credit scene, but honestly, I think I would be more disappointed of sitting through however many credits to get to that point.
The only reason why I say that is because I don't think it would infect the rest of the movie as much, because it would feel more separate.
No, it's fair. Yeah.
That's why I say that. And also because it does kind of feel like a mid-credit scene that just happens to take place before the final scene of the movie.
Honestly, it does strike me as a sort of thing, just from the way it's placed in. It may have been a mid-credit scene, and maybe just someone from WB says, no, let's not copy Marvel too much. Yeah. Like, can we... Because this movie, it didn't have a mid-credit scene. It had one short little bit of something at the very end of the credits. Yeah, but it wasn't even new footage. It was just...
It was about a text,
the same thing.
Basically.
Yeah, exactly. So... yeah, I think it may have started as a mid-credit scene.
Although,
and
what's funny is there was a sizzle reel for like all of DC's movies for the rest of the year, and like half of them have been pushed to next year now, which is funny to me. But yeah, so yeah, worst scene of the movie by far. Outright disliked it. It's like we've made some suggestions, or we've said maybe there's like some small nitpicky improvements you can make to things here or there. But we have been extremely positive, and I love the overall feel of how this movie progresses, the detective feel of it, the performances, the mood, the style, the fact that the city feels like a city with a character, it feels alive. Like, I think there's multiple locations you start to feel like are set locations in this, and it's not just like, because he's not at Wayne Manor, he's at like a it's like a penthouse in the Wayne building he's in for most of this movie.
Right.
But he like the Iceberg Lounge feels like a location we keep revisiting. The work site where the bat signal is, we keep revisiting. Like there's these places we keep going back to, and even the fact that where the Riddler's hiding is an apartment across from the Iceberg Lounge, and then we run to a diner that's round the corner. It feels like we're getting just a little bit of character and geography from all this, and I like that. That's really, really neat. So yeah, the final scenes of the movie, other than Batman narrating saying that he has to be something else, it doesn't say that. I'm saying the Arrow thing. It has to be someone else, something else. But it's kind of a weird final scene because it kind of like plays the departure of Batman and Catwoman, because they do kiss. There's a kiss between them, and there is definitely sort of like flirtatious looks, and there's definitely a connection between them throughout. It's very well done. Yeah. But it's her saying she has to leave. I have to admit, they got a cheap pop out of me for Bloodhaven. She says, yeah, I'm going upstate, maybe Bloodhaven. I was like, oh, Reeves, you bastard.
You could have said anything. You could have said any real city. You could have put in anything, but you chose Bloodhaven for a reason, and I appreciate it.
I like that. But she says she's leaving because like she's done now. Like her dad's plot's wrapped up. She's no reason to be here. And this was one of those moments where I kind of felt like she was saying, hey, you could come with me. And I was getting flashbacks to Dark Knight Rises with the, you've given this city everything. Yeah, come with me.
Not everything. Not yet.
Not yet. And I like that scene, and I like that movie. I know some people don't like Dark Knight Rises. I will stick my neck out for most of it. Yes, is it perfect? Is Talia a little bit shit? Talia's a little bit shit, sure, but there's a lot of great things in that movie. Anyway, so there's a kiss, and they go their separate ways. But we end in this moment where they both ride their motorbikes off, because they get to the same turning point, and they turn in the different directions. One goes left, one goes right. And we just end on a close-up of Batman looking in his mirror at her leaving. And, I mean, Catwoman's definitely coming back. Maybe she'll skip a movie, but I even think she'll skip a movie. I feel like she'll show up at some point in the second movie.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, filming schedules, B, what the story demands. But I do think that she has to come back at some point or another.
I think Penguin's going to be in more. I don't think Penguin will have as much screen time in a sequel, but I do think there'll be a reason to go see him at some point.
Yeah, I mean, Penguin's the one that's getting the TV spinoff, right?
Yeah, but that's set before, though. That's a prequel, I think.
Oh, that's a prequel? Okay, then I'm not sure then.
I think it is, anyway, from memory. But
okay.
Even if it isn't, I think, it's because it leaves him in a place where he's going to take over Falcone's empire.
Right.
So he's going to become the Penguin we kind of know and love.
But it's going to be, basically, it's going to be yet another cop crackdown because they have shown all the corrupt cops out.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see. I do think there's always that turning point in any Batman continuity, mythology, whatever, where the gangsters stop being the threat and the freaks, the actual supervillains, start being the major threat to Gotham. And I feel like this movie was exactly that turning point. It was right there where the main mobster's taken down. There's a big, an actual real crackdown instead of a fake crackdown that they had before. And the first real supervillain showed up.
Yeah, which is why I think if Hush is going to be a villain, because part of me thinks that was just a wink Easter egg. Because because it was one, they're saying he's dead, and two, they said the word Hush was used in the headline. It was for the comic fans.
They specifically, they actually said that the reporter's dead, leaving behind a son.
That's true. They did. You're right. So that may be a seed for later. Maybe they'll not use it. Maybe they will. But I think if they do use Hush, I don't know if he is super villainy enough that I think he carries the whole movie on his own.
No, but I think it seems like every movie has three villains.
Much like this movie, I don't think he's the gimmicky villain, if you will.
No, he would probably be if Riddler was the main villain of this movie, I would assume Hush would probably be the Penguin, where he is causing problems, he is an issue, but he's not the primary focus.
What's funny, I think in terms of story function, he'd actually be more like the Riddler in that there'd be clues and stuff about that there's who he is and there'd be a mystery. But in terms of screen time, in terms of importance in the story, he would be more that level versus, say, maybe it does have a Mr. Freeze. Maybe it has a Joker in that movie. Maybe it has.
Honestly, I could see Hush perfectly coexisting with the Court of Owls storyline.
Oh, because that's all about the city's history and the family's history. You can mix them together. Yeah, I could see that working.
Yeah, because I mean, even the original Court of Owls storyline had the Lincoln March character, which
you could kind of.
Yeah, you could just mold that into Hush. Yeah. That's an easy changeover.
That could be. You could merge them together, probably. Yeah, I could see that. And I think Reeves did say he was a fan of Court of Owls. I think Pattinson did as well, actually.
I mean, I haven't caught up. I've always been trying to keep away from this movie
as
a
whole,
just in case it was great, so I didn't get spoiled with anything.
That's totally fair, but I could see that. I mean, they're using Court of Owls for that new game that's coming out, the Gotham Knights with all the other Bat family members. So that is something that we're starting to see be used in adaptations. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that in a movie.
Entirely possible.
But
I mean, it would. I think if they're really focusing, because they kept mentioning it throughout this entire movie, of the difference between the haves and the have-nots, there would be nothing more than a super rich Uber society behind Gotham that Batman has to fight to therefore side on that side of things. Is he with the haves or the have-nots? I think that's perfectly fitting in this character.
The only concern I'd have with Hush, admittedly merging him into the Lincoln March character would maybe solve this anyway, but is that a part of Hush's character is very much that Bruce had things that he didn't, right? There's a lot of that going on from his character, and I feel like we already did some of that with Riddler and some of their like exchanges, so I wouldn't want to do that part again. But like we just suggested, if you mix him with Lincoln March, where he is kind of connected to the Court of Owls, but he's also trying to steal Bruce's life, you could do something with that.
Yeah, for
sure. There's possible Season of Bane. There's possible Court of Owls. Like I say, Steampunk Mr. Freeze is my number one. I'd also love a Clayface story, and I think what could be fun about Clayface, if let's say he's in the third movie and it's like set some time later, you could actually show what some of his other villains look like by having Clayface pretend to be them before they reveal, oh, it's Clayface.
Very true.
And you get a glimpse of, say, a Mad Hatter before, oh, it's just Clayface. But you see what Mad Hatter looks like.
See, it's one of those things, it was the issue of the Nolan movies as well, where he specifically picked villains that could exist with just real technology. It wasn't anything that had to be too outlandish. And
Clayface, I admit, Clayface and Croc are obviously on the extreme end. I think Steampunk Mr. Freeze is on that level, because the contact lenses that he has that record, right? Those are obviously a little bit. They're not real. They are slightly science fiction-y technology, but they're also they're easy to grasp. They're like, okay, it's just you understand the tech, you understand what contact lens is. You can you can buy that. Yeah, maybe not too far in the future. This is something.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
And it doesn't explain it though, right? The Nolan films love to explain the tech and the gadgets and stuff. Whether that's to your taste or not, it's another question. I feel like this movie though, because it just threw things like that out there, I do kind of believe they would do like a steampunk Mr. Freeze and make it work.
I mean, I would have no problem with it. I trust the director as long as WB trusts the director. I'm fine with him doing whatever he wants. But it is the issue of, from my limited, narrow mindset, especially knowing the actual Mr. Freeze and like his whole backstory and everything like that, there are very few ways I could see of making the character without just evolving him into something completely different. But then again, people would argue that's what happened to the Riddler anyway. And I like that version. So if it is evolving into something that I would consider to be completely different from Mr. Freeze, but is still faithful enough to the character that I like it, then I'm all down for it.
There's obviously a lot of potential villains that you could or could not do. I would like to see one that is a bit more, I guess, less grounded, right? So a Mr. Freeze is on the line of that. Croc, Clayface, Poison Ivy are at the extreme end, where they have powers, where they are monstrous or something, like those kind of ideas. The other question is do they do a Robin? And Pattinson did say that he'd be cool to do Robin in a sequel, but he did caveat by saying, but only if he's 12. Which obviously, as fans of the comics, we're like, yes, 12-year-old Robin, do it.
I can see it, but the only Robin it could be, just in terms of, assuming that we're keeping with everything, is it has to be Jason Todd. We're not going to have the falling trapeze act. That wouldn't fit in this universe. Tim only exists because of Dick's existence. Damian, there's no way they're going to give him a son.
No.
The only way it can exist is if someone is actually taking the hubcaps off of the Batmobile.
I agree that he fits in the world more, but my heart still says I want a proper Dick Grayson becoming Robin.
I understand that. I get it.
So
your heart's gonna be broken somewhere along the line here.
No. I want. I mean, unless they do like an insane time gap for like movie 3 or 4 or something where the whole Bat family exists now. We got Nightwing, we got Batgirl, we got all these other characters.
I mean, I wouldn't be, because the way Batgirl's generally been made is that she starts independently of the Bat family and then gets folded in. I wouldn't be opposed of a Robin existing like that. Someone is inspired by Batman doing this hopeful act at the end of this movie and goes out and wants to be their own version of the superhero, and Batman basically
takes them in.
Takes them in and it's just like, stop putting yourself in danger. If you're going to do it right, and then teaching them. Because
one of the core things I felt throughout this movie is a lot of the elements they do in this movie, and they do them well, is stuff that the other movies didn't even attempt and didn't want to do. Which is why I'm saying do a fantastical villain, or why I'm saying do a proper Robin, because that's the thing. Because there was like the last 2 Schumacher movies, yes, they did have a Robin, they had a Batgirl, but they weren't real Robin, they weren't real Batgirl. You know, they were this. And the thing with Batgirl was they're doing like the HBO Max movie, which I don't think is connected. But like, no, probably not. You totally could like introduce the fact that this Gordon has a family and that he has a teenage daughter in the sequel or the 3rd movie, and say, oh, she's a hacker and she's kind of inspired by Batman. Like, she's starting to like kind of like be motivated to do similar things. But they probably wouldn't do that if they've got like a separate Batgirl movie, because it would just be like too cross pollination, I guess. Yeah, I mean,
I'm hoping, it's always a vague sort of hope, that WB just, because that's always been the thing of, okay, even since like Smallville days, you can do whatever you want, but you can't touch Batman. Batman is our special little property where if there are 2 Batman running around at any given time, the general audience will be confused and they just won't get it.
In a similar vein to what you said about the Robins, like, there's an argument for them to just go straight to another Batgirl, like Steph, because she's the daughter of a villain. You know, Calculator's a sort of villain you could have like Batman taken down in the opening scene. You don't have to like give a plot with him.
Wasn't he Cluemaster?
Oh, sorry, Cluemaster, not Calculator.
Yeah.
Sorry, she fought Calculator in her Batgirl run. Sorry, that's that's a slip. But yeah, like, so you could have him taking down Cluemaster as like a sort of small time villain in the opening scene, right? And then introduce that he has a daughter who wants to do good, and that would fit into the themes of the movie. Even cast to an extent, this idea of someone who was trained by villains.
I think from a storytelling perspective, I think the only way he's going to allow somebody else folded into his life, and this is cynical, but I feel like the only way is if we lose Alfred first. I think he has to have that hole in his life that he then tries to fill with someone else.
Well, I think that's where you go back to, like you said, you're going to have the Graysons dying, but I think much like that scene at the start of this where I connected to him looking at the kid who just lost his father, if he witnesses a kid lose their parents and they are alone, because this kid in this movie still has his mother at least, right? So he's not completely alone. But if there's a kid that is orphaned like a Dick Grayson, I think that's how you do it, is like he does reach out, and you make that be a story point. This is the first time he's truly reaching out because he does relate to someone, and he says, no, I have learned from my experience, I can make this, I can be something for them better than what I had, and I can mold them. And the idea that they want to then join in and fight crime is something that he can sort of, that he can struggle with, like, should I let them do that? Should I train them to be like me? And Alfred will have an opinion on that, presumably. But no, what are you doing? Stop training a child.
I didn't even want you to do this. Why are you letting somebody else?
And you can play with those moral questions. And this movie, does tackle some of the core conceits of Batman and what he inspires in others and his motivations and that mentality. Tackle those questions. Tackle, should he let a kid be involved in this? And why would Alfred be okay with this? Like, tackle that and like get us to a point where they do in some level accept that this kid wants to do this, and Batman understands that for this kid this is an avenue of therapy that he can get out.
Yeah.
Because one part of Dick Grayson's story, that especially as he's gotten older in the comics, is that he has ultimately become healthier than Batman. He is not as broody. He is not as psychologically scarred by what's happened to him. He is a much healthier person. Partly because Batman was there to make sure he didn't turn into just another him.
Yeah, that was, I think it's the Young Justice show. always has the best way, I think is the best way to look at how Batman views the Robins is, I think it's Wonder Woman asks him like, oh, you brought in this boy, why? So he could become someone like you? And Batman responds, so that he doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think if the movie decides to do that, I would be far more open to just like any kid, like, whether it be Dick or Jason, whoever.
And this is a Batman who's, I mean, I wouldn't say this is movie 2. This is at least movie 3, I think, because this is a Batman who's learned a lot and is a bit more advanced. But
I mean, okay, let me put this forward to you. Okay. If it is Jason Todd, if we do that and he starts to like take this kid under his wing,
Joker kills him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would that be okay? Would that finally settle in the like, okay, we got an actual Joker killing a Robin on screen for the first time?
They could do it, and I mean, I don't know if they're going to get like Pattinson and Reeves to do more than 3 movies, because I assume that's what the contract is. It'll be a 3-picture deal.
He's at least been signed on for 3. Yeah. I don't know if there's a renewal.
But I mean, the 4th movie or whatever could then be Under the Red Hood. You could do that as a storyline. But that said, though, one of the thrills is that if they do end after they do that, it's like, well, there's no bringing them back now because you're just ending. You're all leaving. So even if you do like another actor or something, it's not the same franchise. It's, it's a new version.
Yeah, totally separate.
But yeah, okay. I should fairly rate this movie. We're sort of good. Okay. We're spiraling into just fan like theorizing what.
I wanted to try to get this review to as long as the actual movie.
I think
that's my goal here.
We've hit it, I think.
Have we? I was going for 3 hours flat, but yeah, I think it is a few minutes short.
We're at 2:55. By the time we outro, it probably will be over 3 hours. Yeah.
Everyone, play this while you're going to see the movie.
Wait, before we start, David says, "What sort of time do you think this will run?" And I said between 90 minutes and 2 hours, and we're hitting 3 hours. I should have known.
You have a lot to say.
I'd be wrong. Wonderful stuff, though. It's a wonderful. Yes. So, what are you going to rate the Batman out of 10?
So, I mean, I really was sitting and wrestling with this after I first watched it because I wanted to have my rating that first night before I could just forget anything about it. And I mean, if I were to take a stance of like a movie starts at 5 and then does good things to go up and bad things to go down, it'd be pretty high. But if I'm being honest with myself, I would rate this movie starting at a 10 and then docking off anytime it does something that like annoys me. And going off that metric, honestly, I have to give it like a 9.5. This movie, the only thing that it really did to annoy me was the Joker scene. And like I said, everything else felt necessary. It felt prudent to the plot. I liked the story it was telling. I liked the world they were building. All the characters felt real and they all played off of each other. There are 100 different ways that they could have written this so that Batman and Falcone never really interact with each other. But I'm pretty sure Batman interacts with every character in this movie. And Catwoman does as well. And Gordon does as well. Everybody is this web that's so smart and so well told the whole way through that I can't fault anything about it, save for that one part that felt like a loose thread on this web. So 9.5 for me. As comes down to technicals, everything's fantastic about it. I couldn't say anything bad about that. It's just great across the board.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's just a great movie overall. And in terms of comparing it to the only other thing even up at that level to me, which is Dark Knight, I would say pretty equal footing. I think I need to see... I've seen Dark Knight at least a dozen times.
Mm-hmm.
I need to watch this a few more times to be able to say it, whether it's above or below, truly, but
the fact that it's hard to say is a good thing, though.
Yes.
Like the fact that you have to have that internal debate is a shockingly nice thing to say.
Yes.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm tempted to just give it a flat 9 now, until I can see it again and I can formulate my ideas on it. But I like it as special to me that. And there's something, and part of it's just that the right creators are getting a hold of it. But between the 3 Nolan films and this now, there's like 4 amazing Batman movies to varying degrees. And I love Batman Begins. I love Dark Knight Rises. Dark Knight, I think objectively is the best of the 3. Although depending on my mood, you might get me to say Rises is my favorite. But only in my it's not perfect, but there's a lot of good things. Again, if you go and see my review with Connor of those movies. I think we had a great discussion about Dark Knight Rises and about why I think that film is about Batman buying into his own ego and his own shit. Like it's basically him being brought back down to size and realizing that he isn't some superhero, or he is, but he's not. He's not Superman. He is but a man who can make a difference, but he has to believe. So anyway, yeah, I mean, because Dark Knight is a 10 for me. Like I give that a straight 10. And this for me is sitting along my ratings of Begins and Rises. I have to I feel like I have to see it again before I can say where does it place. Am I putting it above those two and just under Dark Knight?
Right.
Yeah, I think I do like Dark Knight more, but there's not much in it. And
I mean, it does also come down to a matter of length. Like I said, I've watched Dark Knight like a dozen times. I can't imagine putting this on a dozen times just because I don't have 3-hour blocks to set aside all the time.
You say that, but Dark Knight's like 2.5 hours. It's not like it's short.
Yeah, fair.
Like the difference between 2.5 and 3 hours is pretty negligible at a certain point, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess. But this is one of those movies. Dark Knight, I feel like I could just put on, and it's so iconic. I have everything playing in my head just by audio alone.
Sure.
This one I feel like is so many small details, so many little things that are put into the craftsmanship of it that it is genuinely hard to like take your eyes off the screen for any amount of time.
You know, this is a gritty little character film that is a study of Batman psychology, whereas The Dark Knight is the Batman is a symbol. It's a battle of ideologies, and the Batman is an avatar for order versus chaos. And you know, people who are going to compare them and say, oh, this is better because Batman, you know, like Christian Bale's Batman is not as much of a character, but he's not, like, the film functions differently. What it's trying to do is very different, and you can have a preference for what you prefer it to do, but I think both this movie, The Batman, and The Dark Knight are both exceptionally good and succeed at what they're aiming to do. And that is just, you know, there you go. This might be the best version as a character of Batman. Like, as Batman as a character, this is probably the best version of him. But like I say, I probably prefer Gary Oldman's Gordon and Heath Ledger's Joker than I do the Gordon in this, who's good, but he's not Gary Oldman's Gordon. And like Riddler in this is good, but he's not Heath Ledger's Joker, and that's okay. Like there's ups and downs to both, and like there's all these things. But what I'm saying is that they're both amazing for different reasons, and there's nuance there. And if you don't happen to like one of them, that's cool. But
at least we can all agree that Batman Forever's pretty good, right?
Yes. But Batman v Superman is absolute trash, and Batman and Superman and that are not those characters, and it can burn in the fires of hell. And like this and all three of Nolan's films wiped the floor with that trash. I hated it. I left that movie angry. So there we go. That is the review. That is the 3-hour review of the Batman.
Did it. I mean, everything I've been on has been significantly longer than the average review. This is just what to expect now.
To be fair, I mean, the last time it was 3 movies, so it had to be long. And then this and the Snyder Cut are both things we're very passionate about. So
yes,
it just
very true.
It makes some sense. I mean, I don't expect I'm even going to bother to see the other comic book movies that are coming out this year in theaters, but I mean, if there's a temptation, maybe David will come back to talk about.
I will pay whatever ticket I want to be able to have a night of Pete to myself. That's all I want.
Oh dear. We'll find reasons to do special one-off movie reviews here or there. Don't worry about it. It'll happen. But this has been The Batman. You can let us know what you think of the movie in the comments below. I'm so glad that I am not editing this one, because I'm in the process right now of editing an almost 2-hour review of Scream 5, and I'm just so glad I've not got another 3-hour epic to edit. So I'm so happy with that. But let us know what you think of the movie in the comments. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things help out on YouTube a lot, so please hit the buttons. Of course, you can head over to Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and support all the content for as little as $1 per month, and get some bonuses for your trouble of the regular movie podcast, Streams After Midnight, and the Atomic Cinema Experiment, as well as some other bits and pieces. So go and have a look and see if you're interested in any of that. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. I suppose I should promote Comics from the Multiverse. If you happen to be into the comic books themselves, then go over to the Comics from the Multiverse channel and check out the weekly podcast that I do with Matt and Connor, talking about the new books. A lot of them are Batman related because it's DC. They release a lot of Batman books. So, and you can also check out David's one-man show where he reads the New 52 books and is miserable, I assume.
Only for the Legion of Superheroes and Green Arrow, mostly.
Well, misery will come later, because when you get to that back half of the New 52, you're going to be, I think, in some misery.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, so you go check out those. But that is the show. Get me on Twitter at Wibble89 if you want to get me on there. I don't know if David wants to promote his Twitter.
I literally just use your Twitter at DC Comics Podcast.
There you go.
Hit me up there.
That's the Comics from the Multiverse Twitter, so yeah, go check that out. At Screams Midnight for the Male Fuzz Movies Twitter in particular. I know it says at @males_fuzz. That's the Male Fuzz TV channel's Twitter, because they both have their own Twitters now, so it's just occurred to me that I never changed the overlay to address that.
Yeah, whatever.
But yes, at Screams
Send us a
Midnight.
tweet somewhere and we'll get to it.
Yes, it will find its way somehow, some way. But yeah, that is it. That's everything. I've promoted all the things I need to promote. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.